Imagine waking up not to the soft buzz of your phone, but to the iron clang of a church bell, louder than thunder, merciless as fate. There's no bed beneath you, just a rotting pile of straw, alive with fleas, soaked in last night's chill. The air is sharp with cold, sharper with stench. You open your eyes not to a sunrise, but to survival. Welcome to the year 1325. You are alive, and that's the only good news. Everything else is about to hurt. Forget what you've seen in movies. Forget noble knights and enchanted castles, elegant gowns and courtly dances. The Middle Ages were not a sepia-toned fantasy. They were a meat grinder of filth, famine, fear, and unrelenting drudgery. This was a time when the most common sound in your day was not laughter, but coughing. Not music, but moaning. Not progress, but prayer. And even that was often a desperate, unanswered plea. Today, you're going to live a single day as a medieval peasant. Just one. But make no mistake, by the end of it, you'll be begging to wake up anywhere else. You open your eyes. Your body aches like it aged 40 years overnight. You're 22. But in this world, that's practically elderly. Your joints grind as you try to stretch, and the cold seems to have reached inside your bones. You can feel the straw mattress beneath you sticking to your skin, damp from condensation, your own sweat, and God knows what else. Bedding, if you can even call it that, is a mixture of hay, animal hair, and moldy fabric. If you're lucky, there's a blanket, woolen, tattered, and pungent with the scent of 3 seasons' worth of sweat and livestock dander. There's no such thing as personal space. You share your one-room wooden hut with your entire family, parents, siblings, maybe even a cousin or two, and your animals. Chickens peck at the dirt floor. A goat snores beside the hearth. There are no windows, just slits in the wall that let in a draft. Light creeps in slowly, illuminating a cloud of dust, straw, and airborne regret. You smell the inside of your own mouth and wonder if something crawled in during the night and died. You try to sit up but hesitate. The floor might be damp from last night's rain, or crusty from something worse. The roof, thatched and leaky, lets in the elements like an unwelcome house guest. You hope the chickens didn't mistake your sleeping head for a roost again. You hope the lice haven't burrowed deeper into your scalp. You hope, mostly, that today won't be the day your already short life gets shorter. You're not alone. Everyone is stirring, snorting, coughing. No one has brushed their teeth. No one has bathed. The smell is a living, breathing organism, a stew of stale beer, old leather, manure, smoke, and human funk. This is not a temporary inconvenience. This is the smell of life. You've never known anything else. If a scented candle existed, it would probably faint from the sheer despair. You hear it then, the bell. A low, bone-shaking clang from the distant church tower. It tolls not just for prayer, but to mark the passage of time. It's the medieval alarm clock, and there's no snooze button. It reminds you that your day, your endless, exhausting, back-breaking day, has officially begun. There's no breakfast waiting on a tray, no warm water, no slippers, just cold feet on colder dirt and the knowledge that, once again, you must earn your survival. You're hungry. Of course you are. You're always hungry. Your body is lean not from health, but from habit. Your ribs could be counted by torchlight. Yesterday's dinner was a lump of pottage, grainy mush made of barley, parsnips, turnips, and whatever else was still edible from the week before. That same pot still simmers by the fire. New ingredients added on top of the old until flavor is replaced by sheer biological confusion. It's less a recipe and more tradition of culinary surrender. But first, nature calls. And it's not calling politely. The concept of a toilet doesn't exist in this world. If you live in a town, you're lucky if there's a communal outhouse nearby, shoulder to shoulder with strangers, no privacy, no flush, just a wooden plank with a hole and a pit that swirls with disease. If you're a peasant in the countryside, you head out behind your hut to a bucket that's already been used by the entire family. You do your business and then throw the contents into the street, perhaps shouting a token warning, Garde-lou. Old French for watch out below. Sometimes people don't move in time. Back in the house, It's time to freshen up, which means wiping your eyes, scratching your scalp, and maybe, just maybe, splashing your face with water if the bucket hasn't frozen solid overnight. You dare not drink it. Even in this pre-science era, people know that water kills. It's full of parasites and filth. Instead, you'll be drinking small beer with breakfast, a weak, low-alcohol brew that's boiled during the brewing process. It won't get you drunk, but it might keep you alive. Children drink it too. Everyone drinks it. It's safer than the stream, which doubles as a sewage canal, a laundry site, and a grave for unfortunate animals. Getting dressed is simple. You only have one outfit, a coarse wool tunic and, if you're lucky, an undergarment. Underwear is optional and often skipped entirely. Your clothes are stiff from dirt and sweat. Washing them is a once-in-a-season event involving a tub, a fire, and hours of scrubbing with ashes or lye. If it's raining, you wait. If it's snowing, you freeze. If it's sunny, you rejoice, and then start coughing from the mold that's finally dried up enough to go airborne. Your shoes, if you have any, are thin leather wrappings more suited for ceremony than survival. Most people go barefoot, through mud, waste, sharp stones, and medieval landmines, also known as horse droppings. Your feet are calloused, cracked, and constantly damp. You've developed a unique shuffle to avoid stepping in anything particularly warm or particularly sharp. By now, you're half-dressed, half-defeated. The day hasn't even started, but already your body screams for rest. You step outside, into a world that's colder, louder, and somehow more pungent than your hut. Smoke from 100 fires fills the air. The ground is a swamp of manure and melted frost. The neighbors are already shouting about stolen eggs. Someone's goat has escaped again. A dog barks at nothing. Children cry. And yet, this is normal. This is life. This is survival. You haven't had breakfast. You haven't washed. You've relieved yourself next to a rat. But you've made it to the outside world, alive, breathing, and ready to work. And that, in medieval Europe, is a miracle in itself. You're outside now, though that's hardly a comfort. The air stings your skin, damp with morning dew and heavy with wood smoke. You can hear the church bell echoing in the distance, a low, metallic groan dragging across the mist. It's the soundtrack of your life. The bell tells you when to wake, when to pray, when to work, when to stop. It rings out over the fields like the voice of God himself, and ignoring it is not an option. Time in the Middle Ages isn't counted in minutes or seconds. It's carved into your bones by hunger, prayer, and toil. The sun hasn't fully risen yet, but the world is already awake. Carts creak as they roll past, pulled by weary oxen and even wearier men. A rooster crows, late as usual. Children whimper, clinging to mothers who have no spare warmth to give. Someone's already arguing in the alleyway. A pig squealed from somewhere too close to your ear. The village hums with a kind of reluctant momentum, like a tired beast being whipped into motion one more time. You trudge to the well to collect water for the day, your breath fogging in the cold air. The bucket is heavy even before it's full. Drawing water isn't just a chore, it's a full-body workout. You brace your feet, lean your weight into the rope, and heave with all your might. The bucket groans its way up, sloshing as it clears the stone lip. If you're lucky, the water isn't frozen. If you're really lucky, it's clear enough to see through. But you're not going to drink it anyway. This water is for washing dishes, rinsing wounds, maybe even wetting the bread to make it chewable. Your drinking water, beer, is already being brewed in a smoky shack nearby. As you head back to your hovel, you pass your neighbor, an old man with a back bent permanently into a question mark. He nods at you, toothless and shivering. He's probably in his 40s. Age is a relative concept, hey. You age like bread. Fast, unevenly, and with signs of rot. You both know the truth without saying it. He might not survive the next frost. But he's out here anyway, like you, doing what needs to be done because no one else will. Breakfast time. If you're expecting a warm hearth and a plate of anything resembling food, prepare to be disappointed. There's no kitchen, no stove, and certainly no menu. What you have is a soot-covered cauldron hung over last night's embers. Inside, pottage. Again. Still. Perpetually. This bubbling concoction is a mix of grains, root vegetables, and mystery leftovers dumped in over the past week. It has no taste. It has no color. It has no mercy. You dip your wooden spoon in and lift a steaming scoop to your lips. It's thick, lukewarm, and tastes like watery oats seasoned with despair. You chew slowly, not because it's delicious, but because it takes effort to break down whatever fibrous mass is floating in it today. Maybe it's a parsnip. Maybe it's a chunk of boot. You don't ask questions. You just eat. On the side, there's bread. Sort of. It's not soft. It's not warm. It's hard, dry, and feels like it could double as a roofing tile. You gnaw on it, jaw straining, wondering if this is the meal that finally breaks your last molar. This bread is made from rye or barley, often mixed with anything that stretches the flour, ground acorns, weeds, maybe even powdered bark. Wheat is for the rich. You don't even know what a croissant is. Your bread is survival, not satisfaction. You look around the hut as you chew. Your father is tying scraps of leather around his swollen feet. Your mother is already ladling pottage into clay bowls, her face blank with exhaustion. Your younger siblings squabble over a piece of burned crust. There's no laughter, just chewing, just steam rising, just the small sound of people trying to make it to lunchtime. You sip your beer, light, weak, but strangely satisfying. It's the only drink you can trust. No parasites, no worms. It won't hydrate you, but it won't kill you either. You think of the stream outside, how the water sparkles in the morning sun, and how just yesterday you saw someone dump a full chamber pot into it. The memory is enough to make you take another sip of beer and push away the urge to vomit. There is no breakfast table. You eat on your haunches, near the fire. The floor is packed earth. The walls are mud and wood. You can see daylight through the cracks, and every now and then a draft snakes through, making the fire hiss and your skin prickle. You're wearing every piece of clothing you own, 2 layers of itchy wool and a hood. It's still not enough. The cold is a tenant here. It pays no rent and never leaves. After breakfast, it's time to get to work. But that's a later chapter. First, you need to get ready. You brush off the crumbs, rinse your spoon in cold water, and shove it into the same satchel you use to carry turnips, tools, and sometimes rats. There's no personal storage, no drawer marked mine. Everything you own fits in a cloth sack, a belt pouch, or your memory. You glance outside. The mist is lifting. The village green is already bustling. A blacksmith hammers away at something metal, the sound echoing like thunder. A tanner nearby stays a vat of animal hides, the stink of ammonia sharp enough to water your eyes. A group of boys are herding geese down the road, laughing and shouting, sticks in hand. Life, in all its grim rhythms, has resumed. Back inside, your mother starts cleaning up. Not with soap. That's rare and precious. She uses hot water, a rag, and some ashes from the hearth. The smell doesn't go away. It just shifts slightly, like putting perfume on a corpse. You help her sweep the dirt floor, brushing away bits of bread and bones and yesterday's regrets. Outside, someone is shouting about missing laundry. You remember you left your tunic out on the line 3 days ago. If it's still there, it's probably frozen solid or stolen. Before heading out, you pull on your shoes, scraps of stitched leather held together with string and hope. They are stiff, cracking, and barely protect you from rocks, let alone the biting cold. But barefoot is worse. You can still remember the time you stepped on a piece of frozen dung and thought it was a blessed stone, until it melted. You look in a cracked shard of mirror hanging by the wall. Your face is pale, lined with grime, and framed by a mop of greasy hair. Your eyes are sunken. Your teeth, best not to look too closely. You splash a bit of cold water on your cheeks and call it a wash. You're as ready as you'll ever be. As you step outside, the village is fully alive now. Smoke pours from every chimney. Chickens scatter across the road. Someone calls your name. The workday has begun. But this isn't a career. There's no salary. There's no growth, no promotions. There's only labor, and your body already knows it's going to hurt. But for one fleeting second, you take a deep breath, cold, sharp, real. and exhale into the gray morning. This is your life. This is your morning. And it never gets easier. There's a certain urgency that modern life rarely prepares you for. A biological reality that hits you with sudden, primal force. In your medieval morning, that force arrives now. Nature doesn't call, it screams. Loud, immediate, and utterly indifferent to your circumstances. You have to go. And here's where modern conveniences betray just how fragile your comfort really is. There's no porcelain throne waiting. No softly humming fan. No privacy lock. No scented candle gently masking the aftermath. There is no toilet. There is no bathroom. In fact, there isn't even a room. If you're in the countryside, your options are laughably limited and tragically familiar. You step out behind your hovel, weaving past chickens, rocks, and the remains of last night's ashes. There, in a corner between a crooked fence post and a pile of rotting firewood, sits your privy, a wooden bucket. It already holds the contributions of your entire family. And let's just say, Uncle Wolfston was not well last night. The smell hits you before you get close. Not just the smell of human waste, but the layers beneath it. Fermented grain, digested root vegetables, ill-advised wild mushrooms. It smells like death's rehearsal room. You try to hold your breath, but that only makes the process worse. No toilet paper, no wipes, no clever folding patterns. You grab a handful of straw, a rag that once had another purpose, or, if you're lucky, a mossy clump that feels vaguely hygienic. Most of the time, you wipe with whatever is available. Sometimes that means your hand, the left one, to be specific. That's why in many parts of medieval Europe, shaking with your left hand was considered either rude or revolting, because everyone knew what it was used for. If you live in a town or village, things aren't better, they're just more public. There might be a communal latrine, a wooden shack perched over a pit, or built along the outer edge of the market square. You enter to find 2 or 3 other people already squatting inside. The smell is biblical. The floor is wet. With what? You don't want to know. There's no division between stalls. Just long benches with holes cut out, positioned over a river of horror. People make small talk. Some are there just to gossip. You keep your eyes forward, your knees bent, and pray to whatever saint handles bowel movements that it's over soon. You hear stories, terrible stories, about men who dropped their knives or belt buckles into the pit and tried to retrieve them. Some never returned. Others did, but with infections that made them wish they hadn't. Falling in wasn't just humiliating. It was potentially fatal. But maybe, just maybe, you live in a castle. Surely, there must be better? You'd think so. But no. In castles, you might find a garderobe, a seat built into the outer wall of the fortress, essentially a vertical shaft that empties directly into the moat below. It's chilly in winter, breezy in summer, and deeply unclean in every season. The smell rises straight up the shaft. It clings to the stone walls like a bitter memory. You do your business and look down. The moat below is supposed to carry the waste away. Instead, it swirls slowly, dark and thick with excrement, rotting food, and sometimes animal carcasses. If the wind is wrong, you'll wear a bit of it on your way out. Worse, moats were not just decorative. They were part of the castle's defenses, and enemies knew this. There are documented cases of attackers climbing into castles through the waste chutes. Think about that. A soldier, desperate enough to breach your defenses, willing to crawl through raw sewage and human filth just to drive his sword through your back. That's medieval commitment. And no matter where you live, peasant hut, village shack, or stone fortress, there's the universal tradition of disposal. In many towns, you simply toss your waste into the street. That's right. Just open your window, shout the warning, guard alo, watch out for the water, and let fly. It lands in the gutter, mixes with horse manure, rainwater, and rotting vegetables, and becomes part of the city's ambient perfume. Of course, not everyone does shout a warning. Some forget. Some just don't care. People walk underneath windows at their peril. It's not uncommon to see someone dashing away, hat dripping, swearing vengeance on the unseen dumper above. The streets themselves are open sewers. There's no underground plumbing, no drainage system worth mentioning. Waste runs in shallow channels along the roads, sometimes diverted by wooden boards. In summer, it bakes under the sun, the smell rising in nauseating waves. In winter, it freezes into slippery death traps. In spring, it turns to mush and spreads on the soles of every shoe. As for cleaning up afterward, don't expect soap and a gentle rinse. There's no running water, no sinks, no hygiene products of any kind. People rinse their hands in cold, cloudy water if it's available. More often, they don't, which is why touching anything, especially during meal times, is always a gamble. Want to know how plague spread? Look no further than a shared soup bowl and an unwashed hand. In wealthier homes, a basin of scented water might be provided. But that's not for you. That's for the lord of the manor, or the visiting noble, or the bishop who insists on smelling like rose petals even while condemning your entire village to hell. Toilet paper, of course, doesn't exist. The Chinese invented something like it centuries earlier, but it won't arrive in Europe for a very, very long time. Until then, it's whatever you can grab, rag, rope end, or read. And then there's the smell. It never leaves. It's on your clothes, in your skin, inside your nose. It seeps into the timber of your home and clings to the wool of your cloak. You grow used to it, or at least you stop noticing. But that doesn't mean it's gone. If you're particularly unlucky, you might encounter the dreaded night jar, a ceramic or wooden pot kept beside the bed for nighttime emergencies. You relieve yourself into it, then, assuming you don't knock it over in the dark, empty in the morning. Sometimes it gets forgotten. Sometimes it's reused by accident. These things happen. The idea of sanitation, as we understand it, simply does not exist. Cleanliness is not next to godliness. It's next to impossible. The very concept of hygiene is years away from invention. Germ theory won't appear until the 19th century. Until then, people think illness comes from bad air or divine punishment. You can wash all you like, they say, but if God wants you sick, soap won't save you. And so, the medieval bathroom experience is not an isolated inconvenience. It is a constant, ambient part of life. It influences everything: your meals, your rituals, your relationships. It explains why no one kisses on the mouth, why handshakes are rare, and why everyone seems to stand just a little bit further apart than necessary. It is, in short, a humiliating, dangerous, and utterly necessary ordeal that repeats every day for every person, regardless of rank. And now that you've done your business, half ashamed, half relieved, you pull up your tunic, step away from the horror you've just added to, and get on with your day. Because in the Middle Ages, relieving yourself doesn't bring peace. It brings one more reminder. You are a body. You are vulnerable. And everything here is trying to kill you. Breakfast in the Middle Ages doesn't welcome you. It ambushes you. There's no aroma of sizzling bacon, no warm bread wafting from an oven, no fresh fruit arranged in a cheerful bowl, no family gathered around a table to start the day with conversation. Breakfast in your world is a formality. It doesn't exist to nourish. It exists to prevent fainting before noon. And even that is a stretch. You re-enter your hut after braving the medieval bathroom experience. Your nose is already deadened to the smells of soot, sweat, and something that might be cheese or might be death. Either way, it's still on the table from 2 nights ago. The hearth fire has burned down to ash, with just enough life left in it to simmer the pot that hangs over the embers like a forgotten punishment. It's your breakfast, and it's pottage. Pottage is not a dish. It is a condition, a culinary sedimentary layer that accumulates over days, even weeks. At its core, it's a stew made of grains, root vegetables, maybe a bean or two, and whatever else hasn't rotted into a biohazard. It is not made fresh each morning. Instead, more ingredients are dumped into it as they become available. Parsnips go in, turnip ends, withered leeks. If someone was particularly lucky the day before, maybe a scrap of bacon fat. If someone was unlucky, a mouse may have fallen in. Either way, the pot keeps bubbling. You don't really eat pottage. You submit to it. It's thick, gray-brown, and lumpy, with the texture of wet mulch and the taste of disappointment. You scoop a bowlful with a wooden ladle, blow on it, and sip carefully. It burns your mouth in places and is ice cold in others. That's how you know it's cooked evenly. Today's flavor profile: dirt, with hints of onion and despair. It clings to your spoon and your tongue. Some mornings you gag a little. Other mornings it goes down easy. Not because it tastes better, but because your body knows this is the only fuel you'll get until dusk. There are no snacks. There's no lunch hour. This sludge is your lifeline. Next to the pot sits a loaf of bread. If pottage is a punishment, this bread is the test that follows. It's hard enough to knock a man out cold. You don't slice it. You attack it. You chew until your jaw aches. Made from coarse barley or rye, it's full of chaff and grit. Wheat bread is for the lords, white, soft, luxurious. Yours has the texture of a wood plank, and possibly the same nutritional value. Sometimes, bread is bulked up with flour substitutes, acorns, powdered roots, ground beans, or even bark. In the worst seasons, you've eaten loaves mixed with clay or sawdust. Not by choice, but by necessity. Hunger does not negotiate. It just waits, growing louder and crueler. Occasionally, the bread is stale. Other times, it's moldy. You scrape off the blue fuzz and keep chewing. Mold doesn't scare you anymore. Not after what you've drunk. Because yes, to wash all this down, you're not drinking water. You're drinking beer. It sounds glamorous until you take your first sip. This is not the amber nectar of modern breweries. This is small beer, a weak, cloudy, often sour brew with just enough alcohol to kill the bacteria, but not enough to intoxicate. It's barely fermented. Children drink it. The elderly drink it. Everyone drinks it. Because the alternative is water straight from the stream, alive with worms, bacteria, animal waste, and your neighbor's toilet bucket. Your first swallow hits the back of your throat like warm vinegar. But it's safe, and that makes it more precious than gold. You drink slowly, not because it's a pleasure, but because you want to make it last. If the keg runs dry before midweek, you'll be forced to choose between dehydration and dysentery. There's no variety to your meal. No fruit unless it's in season. And even then, it's likely fermented into wine for the church or turned into vinegar. Apples are stored in root cellars if you're lucky. Berries rot quickly. Bananas? Unheard of. Oranges? A myth. As for protein, don't even think about it. Meat is for holidays, saints' feast days, or when your Lord has extra game and decides not to throw it to the dogs. Occasionally, you might get a bit of dried fish. It's salty, brittle, and smells like the ocean got sick. You chew it like jerky and hope the bones don't lodge in your throat. Cheese? Only if you made it yourself from sour milk. The process is simple. Curdle it, press it, and pray. It doesn't keep long, and by the time breakfast arrives, it's halfway to being a science project. You nibble around the fuzzy corners and tell yourself it's just extra flavor. Eggs are rare. Chickens are valuable for laying. Eating an egg means sacrificing the potential for more eggs later. It's a trade-off and a luxury. Your family shares one egg, maybe once a week. It's boiled until gray and rubbery, then divided like treasure. Salt is worth more than you are. It's locked in wooden chests, hoarded like coin. It preserves food, seasons it, and in some regions, it's even used to pay rent. You get a pinch once in a while, and it transforms your pottage from mud to seasoned mud. As you eat, you try not to think about the rats. You've heard them at night, scratching, squeaking, chewing. Sometimes you wake up to find droppings near the pot. Sometimes inside it. You tell yourself heat kills everything. You tell yourself not to look too closely. You tell yourself, this is fine. You try to remember what hunger felt like yesterday. Was it worse? Was it better? Does it matter? Hunger is not a moment in your day. It is the background hum of existence. The hut is quiet as everyone eats. No one talks. Talking takes energy. Besides, there's nothing new to say. The weather is bad. The harvest was worse. Someone's child is sick. The priest said more taxes are coming. Everyone nods. Everyone already knew. When you're done eating, you don't clean up. There's nothing to clean. The pot stays on the fire, bubbling until evening. The spoons go back into the sack. The bread is wrapped in cloth and hung from a beam to keep it away from mice. You wipe your face with your sleeve and swallow hard. And that's it. That's breakfast. No caffeine buzz. No warm pastries. No Instagram-worthy plating. Just a wooden bowl of beige sadness and a drink that smells like vinegar and barley. But you're not dead, and that means it's time to work. Getting dressed in the Middle Ages isn't about self-expression. It isn't about matching your boots to your belt or layering with flair. It's not even about comfort. Getting dressed in 1325 is a grim ritual, like wrapping your body in a burlap sack of shared suffering. Your wardrobe is less a collection of garments and more a singular piece of wearable punishment. You have one outfit, one, and you wear it every day, not because you're quirky or minimalist, but because that's all you own. It's a woolen tunic, scratchy and stiff, dyed a sad shade of brown or gray. Bright colors require expensive dyes. Saffron yellow, indigo blue, blood red, and those are reserved for nobles, clergy, or the truly insane. You wear earth tones, and not by choice. Your clothes match the dirt because they're the dirt. The tunic is coarse, roughly stitched, and likely hand-me-down from someone already buried. It hangs on your frame like a wet curtain, smells vaguely of mildew and ash, and scratches like 1,000 tiny curses every time you move. Beneath it, if you're lucky, you have a linen undertunic. If not, you're bare-skinned underneath the wool, and every step feels like your shirt is trying to exfoliate you with thorns. You slip the tunic over your head, feeling the collar grind against your neck. No buttons, no zippers, just laces or ties made from rough string. You pull it tight and say a silent prayer that today won't be the day the seam finally gives out. Most garments aren't tailored. They're just roughly square pieces of fabric, shaped with faith and desperation. If you're a woman, your outfit is even less forgiving. You wear a long woolen gown, often layered with an apron. It drags in the dirt, collects filth like a sponge, and tangles around your ankles when you walk. You might wrap your hair in a linen coif or scarf, especially if you're married. Loose hair is a sign of youth, or worse, vanity. People talk, and in the Middle Ages, gossip spreads faster than the plague. Shoes, if you own any, are a minor miracle. They're made of thin, untreated leather, hand-stitched, and uneven. They offer all the protection of a damp napkin. There's no sole support, no waterproofing, and absolutely no warmth. Most peasants go barefoot, even in snow. Your feet are calloused, cracked, and discolored. You stepped on thorns, dung, sharp stones, even the occasional rat, and just kept walking. Socks? Don't even ask. If you're feeling fancy, you might wrap your feet in scraps of linen or wool. But more often than not, your toes peek through holes like they're trying to escape. Your boots squeak, not from leather, but from fungal colonies setting up shop inside. Athlete's foot? Try plague of the toes. Now that you're dressed, it's time to do something about your hair. You don't own a comb, just a piece of bone or wood with wide teeth, cracked from use. You drag it through your hair, pulling out tangles, straw, and inevitably lice. Everyone has lice. It's not a scandal. It's a roommate. Lice, fleas, and bedbugs are a way of life. They live in your bedding, your clothes, and your body hair. You scratch constantly, in private, in public, during meals, during prayer. No one blinks. You might try to kill them with ashes or vinegar or by sitting near the fire and hoping they jump ship. But they always come back. They always win. Bathing is rare. Water is cold, scarce, and suspect. Baths are seen as luxurious at best, dangerous at worst. Doctors of the era often claim that warm water opens your pores and lets the disease in. So many people avoid bathing altogether. Instead, you clean yourself with a dry cloth, some herbs, or by simply changing your shirt, assuming you have another one. When you do bathe, it's a production. You have to haul buckets of water from a well or stream, heat it over a fire, fill a wooden tub that leaks like a gossiping monk, and hope no one else uses it before you. Or worse, after. There's no soap, just lye or ashes mixed with fat. It stings, it smells, and it doesn't last. Your clothes are rarely washed. Maybe once a season. Maybe not at all. Washing clothes means building a fire, heating water, soaking the fabric for hours, then beating it with sticks or scrubbing it with stones. It's exhausting, time-consuming, and not very effective. Most people just wear their garments until they rot off or become so infested they walk away on their own. Stains? Permanent. Odors? Omnipresent. That brown streak on your tunic? Don't ask. That crust on your sleeve? Could be soup. Could be blood. Could be both. Everything smells. Your clothes, your body, your breath. But when everyone smells, no one notices. Or they pretend not to. It's a form of survival. Women face extra challenges. Menstruation in the Middle Ages is a silent misery. There are no pads, tampons, or even proper cloth. Women use rags, moss, or nothing at all. There's no pain relief, no privacy, and no understanding. It's seen as a curse, a punishment, a woman's burden. And if you bleed through your dress, you pray no one notices. Or at least, that they don't care enough to accuse you of witchcraft. Jewelry? You're joking. A belt buckle is a status symbol. A brooch is luxury. A pewter ring makes you feel like royalty. You wear a pouch on your belt to hold the only things you own, maybe a spoon, a comb, a piece of bread. Pockets haven't been invented yet. You carry your life in a sack. Perfume doesn't exist. Some women tuck lavender or rosemary into their bodices to mask the scent of living. Men rub animal fat on their skin to stay warm. It clings to their tunics like a grease trap. Deodorant is a myth. Everyone sweats. Everyone smells. It's a democracy of discomfort. By the time you're fully dressed, you already itch. Your skin is blotchy and red from old irritation, insect bites, and constant rubbing. You develop rashes. You hide them. You scratch in secret. Sometimes the itching is so bad you cry at night, muffling the sound in your straw pillow to avoid waking your siblings. But crying doesn't help. Complaining doesn't help. You get dressed anyway. You step outside, and you do it again the next day, and the next, and the next, until your tunic rots, your shoes collapse, and your body finally gives up. That's medieval fashion. Not trends. Not vanity. Just fabric between you and the elements. A woolen prison wrapped in mud, bugs, and centuries of inherited suffering. You might be cold. You might be filthy. But you're clothed. And in this world, that's enough to start the day. You're ready for the day, fed, dressed, and freshly miserable. There's just one thing you haven't dealt with yet. Your mouth. Or, as it's known in the 14th century, the gateway to suffering. In a modern world, you wake up, stretch, and reach for your toothbrush. You squeeze mini gel onto soft bristles, scrub for 2 minutes, and rinse with a peppermint swirl of mouthwash. In the Middle Ages, you wake up and try to ignore the fact that your teeth feel like they've been dipped in chalk and rubbed with a hoof. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no dental floss, no fluoride, no clean water, no trained dentist. Nothing. Your mouth is a battlefield, and it's losing the war. Some people, mainly the wealthier ones, chew on frayed sticks or natural twigs like licorice root or dogwood to clean their teeth. It's the closest thing to a toothbrush that exists. If you're lucky, you have a strip of linen cloth to rub across your gums, hoping to scrub away whatever you gnashed through yesterday. There are no artificial sweeteners, no whitening strips. If anything, the goal is simply to get your teeth to stop throbbing. Because that's the real issue. Pain. Toothaches are not occasional annoyances in the Middle Ages. They are daily, pulsing, soul-sapping companions. It starts with a dull ache, maybe near the molar, then pressure, then sharp stabbing pain when you chew even the softest pottage. You try to ignore it. You try not to chew on that side. You try to sleep upright to avoid the pressure. But it gets worse. It always gets worse. Gums are constantly inflamed. There's no such thing as flossing, so food rots between your teeth. Cavities form, fester, and infect. Your breath smells like death with a hint of barley. You can taste metal. You can taste rot. And sometimes, when you run your tongue along your teeth, something feels loose. That's the moment you start praying. Because you know what comes next. There are no dentists. There are barber surgeons. A terrifying profession that combines haircuts with bloodletting, amputations, and extractions. You go to the same man for a shave and to have your infected canine yanked out with a pair of iron pliers. And he doesn't clean them between uses. Sterilization won't be invented for centuries. Neither will anesthesia. You walk into his smoky hut, sit on a stool, and hope he's sober. He opens your mouth, sniffs, nods grimly, and heats his tool over the fire. Not to disinfect it, just to bend it if needed. Then he grips your tooth and pulls. There is no countdown. No mercy, no numbness, just a wrenching twist and the sound of your own body snapping. If you're lucky, the tooth comes out clean. If you're not, it breaks. And now you've got half a fong rotting in your jaw, open to infection, exposed to the air, and begging for tetanus. There's no painkiller, no gauze, just a rag to bite and a mug of beer to swish around afterward, hoping the alcohol does something, anything, to stop the burning. But even that crude brutality assumes you're able to find someone to help. Most peasants suffer in silence. You might try herbal remedies, chewing on cloves, rinsing with vinegar, packing the tooth with garlic paste or ashes. They burn. They stink. But sometimes they distract you just long enough to sleep through the night. And sleep is already hard to come by. The pain pulses with your heartbeat. It wakes you up at 2 a.m. and reminds you that your skull is rotting from the inside out. If the infection spreads, if it reaches the root or your bloodstream, you develop fever, swelling, delirium, sepsis, and eventually death. Yes, you can die from toothache, and many do, but it's not just the pain. It's the shame. A rotting mouth isn't just ugly. It's seen as moral failure. People believe bad teeth are a sign of sin, gluttony, or laziness. Nobles, ironically, fare no better. They have access to more sugar, imported from the East at staggering cost, and they flaunt it. Sweetened cakes, glazed fruits, sugary wines, and with it, faster decay. The nobles may have silk gowns and gold rings, but their mouths are horror shows. Black teeth, missing molars, infected gums. Their smiles are more threatening than charming. That's why they rarely show them. Portraits from the time often depict people with closed mouths, pursed lips, or solemn expressions. They're not being mysterious. They're hiding the battlefield in their faces. And there's no such thing as braces. No dental surgery. No cosmetic anything. If your teeth are crooked, missing, broken, or blackened, that's who you are. There's no fixing it, just enduring it. Bad breath is so common it barely registers. The average person's mouth smells like fermented grain, old onions, infected gums, and tragedy. Kissing is rare and risky. Courtship doesn't depend on your smile. It depends on your livestock and land. Even priests don't get a pass. Monks might rinse their mouths with wine or chew on herbs, but they still fall prey to the same diseases and abscesses. They suffer, they rot, and they pray. And sometimes, in their sermons, they remind the congregation that pain is a gift, that suffering purifies the soul. You don't care. You trade all the soul cleansing in the world for one modern toothbrush. Children are born into this oral nightmare. By age 5, many already have cavities. By 10, several missing teeth. By 20, a jaw full of rot. By 30, you're chewing on one side of your mouth, if at all. By 40, if you made it that far, you might have just a handful of teeth left, yellowed stubs ground flat from years of hard bread and grit. And let's talk about that bread. It's not just stale, it's dangerous. The millstones used to grind flour are made of stone, and over time, tiny fragments chip off into the flour. You don't see them, but your teeth feel them. Every bite is like chewing sandpaper. Over years, it wears down your enamel, exposing nerves, turning strong teeth into crumbling ruins. But there's no escape. You have to eat. You have to chew, even if every bite feels like punishment. So you develop little rituals. You chew on the side that hurts less. You use your fingers to press your gums when the pain flares. You rinse with hot water. You push cloves between your teeth and pray the numbness kicks in. And eventually, you go them in other ways. Because in the Middle Ages, your mouth is not a symbol of joy. It's not for laughter or pleasure or aesthetics. It is a ticking clock, and when it breaks, it drags the rest of you down with it. You've survived breakfast. You're dressed. Your jaw aches from stale bread, and your scalp itches with lice. The sun has barely risen, but already the day stretches before you like a punishment yet to be administered. You don't get to choose when to start working. The sun does. It peeks over the hills like a cruel overseer, and that's your cue. Time to work. But work in the Middle Ages isn't a job. It's a sentence. There are no career paths, no dream jobs, no callings. You work because not working means starving. You work until your hands blister, your back bows, and your knees scream. And when that happens, you keep working. You're a peasant. That means you don't own the land you live on, much less the fields you break your body tending. Everything you grow belongs to your local lord. He lets you stay on his land in exchange for your labor, your loyalty, and a generous share of your harvest. This is feudalism, an elegant term for organized exploitation. You rise before dawn. Your tools are wooden, cracked, and passed down through generations of equally tired people. Maybe you have a hoe, a dull sickle, or a shovel with a splintering handle. Oxen, if you're lucky. Your own strength, if not. The fields are wide, gray, and wet. Rain from last night hasn't drained. It never does. Mud clings to your boots, tries to suck them off with every step. You trudge into the soil and begin. Planting, reaping, hoeing, hauling. Sometimes in spring, sometimes in summer, sometimes year-round, depending on what the land demands. And the land always demands more than you can give. Your spine curves with each hour. By mid-morning, you've already sweated through your tunic and the back of your neck burns. If it's winter, your fingers go numb before you make your second row. There's no weather too extreme. Only whether you survive or don't. There are no water breaks, no lunch hours, just gulps of warm beer between rows and a cold piece of bread shoved into your mouth with dirt still on your fingers. You eat with your hands, chew while you work, and hope your stomach stops growling before nightfall. If you're a woman, the day is twice as long and half as appreciated. You work the fields like the men, but also care for the children, cook every meal, fetch water, clean the home, spin wool, mend clothes, and try not to die of childbirth before you turn 30. Your work isn't valued. It's assumed. Your body isn't yours. It's an asset for reproduction. Children don't play. They don't read. By age 5, they're working beside you, carrying water, herding goats, weeding gardens, plucking feathers. Childhood isn't a phase. It's a luxury no one can afford. You're not paid for your work. The only salary is survival. You might keep a small portion of your harvest, but most of it, grain, eggs, cheese, even the wool from your sheep, goes to your lord. He doesn't labor. He doesn't sweat. But his table groans with roasts, pies, and wine while you suck marrow from soup bones and pretend it's a feast. Sick? Tough luck. There's no calling in. No sick days. You work through the fever, through the cough, through the aching bones. If you can stand, you can work. If you can't, someone else takes your place and your share. Break a bone? You wrap it in cloth and keep digging. Pull a muscle? Walk off. Infection? Hope the fever passes. There is no doctor, no healer, just warm ale and quiet suffering. Every cut, every blister, every sore is a gamble. Will it heal? Will it fester? Will it kill you? You never know. And when the day ends, there is no relief. You walk back to your hovel, muscles trembling, hands bleeding, and immediately start the second shift, repairing tools, cooking dinner, feeding animals. If you're lucky, you sleep. If you're unlucky, you cough all night from mold, wake to lice bites, or spend the hours fixing a leak in the roof before rain ruins the bedding. And yet, this is a good day. No raids, no crop failures, no plague, just a slow grind of another 16-hour shift. And you do it again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. 6 days a week, every week, forever. Sunday is your day off, except it's not. You're expected to attend Mass, kneel on cold stone floors, confess your sins, and beg for mercy. And maybe, if you're fortunate, you'll get to sit quietly in the church for a few moments. That's your break. The worst part? This is normal. No one questions it. You were born into this system. So is your father. So is his. This is your place in the divine order of things, below the nobility, beneath the clergy, barely above the livestock. You are made to toil. God wills it. The priest confirms it, and the Lord enforces it. Don't expect gratitude. Your Lord doesn't know your name. To him, you're just another smudge of mud that happens to walk and farm. If he passes you on horseback, you bow. If he calls on you for extra labor, building his walls, mending his roads, marching in his war, you don't say no. You say, yes, my Lord, and pray your family doesn't starve in your absence. Maybe you dream. Maybe you imagine a better life. A warm bed, a day without pain, a moment to think without fear. But there's no ladder here, no rising in the ranks. If you want to leave your village, you need permission. If you want to own land, you need money. If you want a future, you need a miracle. And miracles are in short supply. The work never ends. You plant in spring, weed in summer, harvest in fall, suffer in winter. When the crops fail, and they will, you tighten your belt and bury your neighbor. When a noble raises taxes, you curse under your breath and eat fewer meals. When a lord marches off to war, you build his siege towers with splinters in your palms and mud in your lungs. You've seen men die from exhaustion. Women collapse while working the fields 8 months pregnant. Children fall into wells, never to return. And still the wool turns. Still the sun rises. Still the bell tolls. And still you work. Because in the Middle Ages, labor isn't just what you do. It's who you are. The weather doesn't just happen to you in the Middle Ages. It attacks you. It's not a forecast. It's a curse. A daily assault from above that doesn't care if you're tired, sick, pregnant, already halfway to death. There's no shelter from it. No central heating. No waterproof jacket. Just you, your one miserable tunic, and the elements conspiring to undo you. Let's start with winter. Winter in the Middle Ages is less a season and more a siege. It arrives early, stays long, and comes armed. The wind doesn't blow, it slices. The cold doesn't creep, it invades. You wake up each morning with your breath hanging in the air and your limbs frozen into brittle sticks. You don't climb out of bed so much as break off from it. The damp wool blanket you sleep under is stiff with frost and body odor. Your breath condensed on the thatched roof above you, forming droplets that fall on your face like a slow leak from a god who finds your suffering amusing. There's no insulation. Your walls are wooden planks daubed with mud, and the gaps are large enough to let in spiders, rain, and your neighbor's curses. The roof leaks. The door warps. The floor is just dead, frozen solid and packed with misery. You bundle yourself and everything you own, which is still not enough. Your fingers go numb before breakfast. Your toes lose all feeling by mid-morning. Frostbite isn't diagnosed. It's just called bad luck. Your firewood, if you have any, burns fast and smokes even faster. Most peasants can't afford enough to keep a fire going through the night. You huddle around a small flame, the only thing between you and a slow freeze, while the smoke clogs your lungs and blackens your walls. If you're caught gathering wood from the wrong forest, because forests are often the property of the local lord, you could be whipped or executed. Yes, you can die for picking up a stick. Welcome to feudal law. Bathing? Forget it. Even if you wanted to strip down and wash, you'd be risking hypothermia. Water freezes solid. Soap doesn't help. The idea of warm water is laughable. You sponge yourself with a damp cloth, if you dare, and try not to cry because the tears might freeze on your cheeks. Food is scarce. Nothing grows. Root vegetables stored from the fall are now soft, sprouting, or gone. Bread is rock-hard and moldy. Meat is salted to the point of chemical warfare. Everything is dry or fermented, or it's spoiled. You eat less. You grow weaker. You work anyway. Sleep offers no escape. You lie stiff in a pile of shivering relatives, animals, and lice, your breath condensing against the ceiling, your legs cramping from cold. The silence is broken only by coughing, snoring, or the distant howling of wolves that are also starving and not above raiding villages. You hear of people freezing to death in their sleep. You wonder if you'll be one of them. Then the bell tolls. Another morning. Another round. And just when you think you've survived the worst, summer arrives. At first, it feels like relief. The sun peeks through the thatch, and for a brief, dangerous moment, you feel warmth on your skin. You almost smile. You almost hope. Then it gets worse. Your home, your drafty, freezing box in winter, turns into an oven in summer. Heat builds during the day, trapped by the low ceiling and sealed windows. The stench multiplies. Sweat pours down your back, pools under your tunic, soaks your blanket. There's no deodorant, no ventilation, no escape. You breathe in the hot stink of mold, urine, old meat, and unwashed bodies. It feels like drowning in a pigsty. Outside, The sun doesn't shine, it blisters. You work in the fields with the same clothes you wore in February. You can't remove layers because society frowns on indecency, and sunburn can lead to infected sores. So you sweat, and itch, and overheat. You tie a rag around your head to keep the sun off your scalp. It soaks through in an hour. There is no clean water to cool you. The stream is low, full of sediment and sludge. The village well produces warm, cloudy water that tastes of copper and regret. You drink beer. Again, not because you want to, but because it's that or stomach worms. Your body dehydrates, but your stomach stays full of sour liquid that only makes you sweat more. Flies descend in clouds. They swarm your face, your food, your open wounds. Mosquitoes bite your ankles and buzz in your ears while you try to sleep. Ticks burrow into your legs. Lice multiply with joy. Even the air feels alive with discomfort. Your skin chafes from the heat, the sweat, and the scratchy wool that was never designed for this temperature. Rashes appear and never quite go away. Infections fester. Boils erupt. There is no treatment. You rub herbs on them, or mud, or nothing. And let's not forget the plagues. Summer is a carnival for disease. Rotting food, stagnant water, and a lack of sanitation combine into the perfect breeding ground. One sneeze from your neighbor and the whole village is burying its dead. You've heard of places where a third of the town died in a single week. They say the air is cursed, or that God is angry. No one mentions hygiene because no one knows what that is. Clothing offers no help. You own one outfit. Remember, it's soaked in sweat by noon, and you wear it anyway. If you try to wash it, you risk mold. If you take it off, you risk exposure. Your tunic becomes your second skin, a soggy, stinking cocoon of heat and bacteria. Then come the storms. Summer storms aren't romantic, they are terrifying. Thunder cracks like cannon fire. Rain pours in through the roof. Wind knocks over fences. Lightning hits your neighbor's barn. And suddenly you're watching your winter hay supply go up in smoke. No insurance. No help. Just loss. After the rain comes the rot. Everything that got wet stays wet. The floor of your home turns to mush. Your bedding grows damp and smells like decay. Mold creeps along the walls. Your feet begin to peel. You develop trench foot in your own house. And let's not romanticize the in-between seasons. Spring is mud. Endless, sticky, calf-deep mud. It traps carts, swallows boots, and floods cellars. Fall is cold rain, shorter days, and panic because winter is coming and you're not ready. You never are. In every season, the weather is a force. It shapes your days. It steals your strength. It decides whether you'll eat, sleep, work, or die. You don't check the weather. You feel it in your bones, in your joints, in your chest. And the worst part, there's no escape. You can't move south for winter or stay in during the heat wave. There's no retreat, no control, only endurance. Because in the Middle Ages, the weather isn't a conversation topic. It's your most reliable enemy. You're sweating through your tunic. You've spent hours laboring under a cruel sun, your tongue dry, your lips cracked, your vision swimming. You need a drink, a sip of something, anything, to push back the slow, grinding thirst building in your skull. You walk to the stream. It looks beautiful, clear, bubbling, reflecting the sky in a dance of sparkles and serenity. A modern person might see it and think, how picturesque. You see it and think, I hope no one died upstream today. Because this water, lovely though it may appear, is lying to you. It hides its malice in beauty. It flows past villages, fields, and forests, each of them contributing a unique, invisible poison. Chamber pots, animal dung, corpses of livestock, even rotting human remains, dumped in secret. Every upstream sin becomes your downstream sentence. And you know the stories. People who drank from the stream and woke up with cramps, fever, and lice. Sweating, vomiting, bleeding from places that shouldn't bleed. Dead within days. Always, not dead, just broken. Some survive, but never fully. Limbs shriveled, faces disfigured, bowels permanently ruined. So you turn away. You walk back to your hovel and grab the safer option, beer. It's warm, weak, and sour. but it's been boiled during brewing, which makes it relatively safe. It won't hydrate you. Not really. But it won't kill you either. Small beer, your daily shield against a microscopic apocalypse. Children drink it. The elderly drink it. Monks drink it between prayers. It's the great equalizer of medieval hydration. Not because it's beloved, but because it's less lethal than the water that runs beside your village like a snake waiting to strike. Bathing in that same stream. Only if you must. Only if you want to risk infection through the skin. Communal bathhouses exist, especially in towns, but their reputation is mixed. They are places of scandal, disease, and whispered sins. The church disapproves. The neighbors gossip. And even if you ignore both, the bathhouse is still a soup of other people's filth. But what happens when caution fails? When the fever comes anyway? When the aching starts in your belly or behind your eyes? When the wound you hoped would scab instead oozes with something yellow, green, and terrifying? Now you need help. Now you need a healer. And hey, in the Middle Ages, help comes with a blade, a bowl, or a prayer. The dominant medical theory of the time isn't based on bacteria or viruses. Germ theory won't be invented for another 5 centuries. Instead, illness is blamed on your 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These fluids, believed to govern your health and personality, must remain in balance. If they don't, you get sick. Coughing blood, too much heat in your blood. Chronic fatigue, too much black bile. Diarrhea, probably your bile is angry. Or your sins are. Hard to say. The solution? Balance the humus. That might mean bloodletting, cutting open your vein to drain the excess blood. Cupping, heated glass domes placed on your skin to draw blood to the surface. Leeches, applied to your body to suck out toxins and more blood. Puking and purging, induced with herbs, metals, or animal parts to rid your body of something. Every solution sounds like torture, because it is. And it doesn't stop there. Maybe your illness is caused by miasma, bad air. So you burn aromatic herbs. You carry pomanders of dried flowers and spices. You stuff garlic into your nostrils. All in an attempt to keep out the invisible demons floating on the breeze. If your condition worsens, they bring out the real tools: red-hot irons, bone saws, or knives blackened by fire. Not to disinfect them, just to terrify whatever devil is in your body. An abscess, lanced without anesthetic. A tumor, sliced open and drained, then covered in moss or tar. A broken bone, set while you scream and someone holds you down. Surgery is rare and horrifying. Done in the open. No gloves. No sterile room. Just you, the barber surgeon, a dirty table, and the screaming knowledge that you might not leave alive. If you're lucky, you'll pass out. If you're unlucky, you'll live through every second. Antibiotics. Non-existent. Infection is treated with honey, vinegar, moldy bread, or prayer. Maybe a poultice of mashed herbs tied to the wound with a strip of your neighbor's discarded tunic. Sometimes the herbs help. Usually, they don't. Pregnancy. A gamble with no safety net. Midwives do their best, but even a slight complication can kill both mother and child. There's no prenatal care, no sanitation, no cesarean that ends well. And if you're a woman with knowledge of herbs or healing, congratulations, you're now a witch. That'll get you drowned, burned, or worse. And if your illness is believed to be spiritual, a punishment from God, you'll be treated accordingly. That might mean penance, fasting, or being tied to the church pillar while a priest screams scripture at your fevered body. Possessed, you'll be exorcised. Mad, chained up or driven out. The line between medicine and punishment is blurry and often non-existent. Even death is no guarantee of peace. Your body must be buried quickly to avoid spreading disease. There's no embalming, no real preservation. If you die of plague, your corpse is tossed in a pit. If you're lucky, a priest whispers something over your body. If not, you're just another bundle of rot under a shallow mound of dirt. And yet, people keep trying. Monks copy ancient texts filled with medical advice from Galen or Hippocrates, ideas already centuries outdated. Apothecaries sell dried lizards, powdered bones, and unicorn horn to those who can pay. Peasants rely on superstition, tying amulets around their necks, hanging garlic in doorways, avoiding black cats and left-handed strangers. Sometimes, people survive, against all odds, and when they do, it's seen as a miracle, not proof of health, proof of divine mercy. The barber surgeon takes the credit. The priest says your prayers worked. The leech? He gets reused. But you know better. You know that every cough could be your last. Every scratch a death sentence. Every swallow of water a loaded weapon. Your body is not just a vessel. It's a war zone. And you have no armor. So you keep drinking your beer. You avoid the healer unless absolutely necessary. You wash your hands with superstition and pray your guts hold together until next season. Because in the Middle Ages, disease isn't just part of life. It is life. You've survived the filth, the hunger, the work, the cold, the rot, and the remedies worse than the diseases. And now, after everything, you sit by your fire, if you have one, nursing a body that feels twice its age. You're 22, maybe 25. And in medieval Europe, you are officially middle-aged. If you're lucky. Because in this world, death doesn't wait for a retirement party. It doesn't check your savings, your social calendar, or your dreams. It simply shows up, uninvited, unannounced, and often indistinguishable from everyday life. Here, death is not a surprise. It's an expectation. Let's talk numbers. The average life expectancy in the Middle Ages hovers around 30 to 40 years. And that's after accounting for the enormous number of children who don't survive past their 5th birthday. Infant mortality is staggering. Half of all children die young, of infection, malnutrition, exposure, or simple bad luck. If you make it to adolescence, congratulations. You've dodged the first of many blades. But adulthood is no sanctuary. Now you must endure work that crushes your spine, whether that cracks your skin, and food that threatens your gut more than it feeds your body. You farm until your joints disintegrate. You haul water until your back is crooked. You eat bread full of grit until your teeth turn to powder. And still, you keep moving, because stopping means starving. Disease waits around every corner. A cough could be the flu or the plague. A scrape could be an injury or an invitation to a week-long fever ending in a shallow grave. You don't know. There's no diagnosis, just symptoms and prayers. And if those fail, the priest, he'll whisper last rites while your family weeps beside the straw mattress you may have to share with the living even after you die. Women carry their own, even crueler burden. Childbirth is a death sentence wrapped in hope. No medicine, no surgery, no sterile instruments. A tear, a breech birth, or an infection means agony and silence, because screaming too loudly might be mistaken for weakness or sin. The only pain relief is biting down and waiting for the end of the labor or of life. And if the child survives, that's only the beginning of her suffering. She'll grow up in a world that sees her first as a daughter, then as property, then as a vessel. Her intelligence is suspicious. Her opinions are dangerous. If she's too quiet, she's brooding. Too loud, a scold. Too clever, a witch. It's not a matter of if she'll be hurt, but how often. Death isn't always medical. It's political. You could die from a disagreement with a noble, an accusation from a neighbor, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Crime is rampant. Punishment is theatrical. Hangings, beheadings, whippings, drownings, all done publicly for the moral good of the community. You might watch your friend die for stealing a loaf of bread. You might be next for killing a deer that belonged to the Lord. And let's not forget war. It simmers constantly, just outside the village borders. Lords squabble over land. Kings march off for glory. Crusades erupt in the name of God and greed. And when war comes, it doesn't knock. It kicks down the door. Men are drafted. Women are left vulnerable. Homes are looted. Fields are burned. And if you're lucky enough not to die in battle, disease will likely finish the job in the camp. When death comes, whether through sickness, violence, or starvation, your burial is quick and cheap. There's no embalming, no polished casket, just a hole, a shroud, and a short prayer. If you died of plague, you might not even get that. You're thrown into a mass pit with dozens, maybe hundreds of others. Your name forgotten, your body dumped, your soul. Everyone hopes somewhere better. And what does better even mean? Heaven, according to the church, is the ultimate reward, but only if you've obeyed. You've tithed, you've fasted, you've confessed, you haven't questioned the priest, missed mass, or stolen from your neighbor's garden. One wrong thought, one moment of lust or doubt or hunger, and it's eternal fire. Demons with pitchforks, lakes of boiling blood. The pain never ends. At least here on earth, you can sleep, sometimes. So you live carefully. You keep your head down. You follow the rules. You fear God. You fear death. And still it finds you. But, and this is the most astonishing part, you live anyway. You laugh. Sometimes. You tell stories. Around the fire, when the children are asleep. You sing songs passed down from the dead. Songs with verses added over time, like a growing memory. You love, quietly or boldly or without permission. You dance at weddings. You cry at funerals. You carve small initials into beams, knowing they might be the only mark you leave behind. You see seasons change and greet them like old friends and older enemies. You eat berries in summer and pray for roots in winter. You learn to tell the time by the position of the sun and the bells of the church. You celebrate births even as you mourn how many won't see adulthood. You survive, barely, but stubbornly. This is not a life of ease. It's not one of comfort, opportunity, or fulfillment. But it's a life, and somehow, in the margins of hardship, people still find space for humanity, for hope, for tiny joys carved between the agony. And then, one day you stop. There's no retirement, no pension, no farewell party. You simply don't wake up, or you collapse in the fields, or the fever takes you, or the coughing gets worse, or your leg wound swells, turns black, and spreads to your heart. It doesn't matter how, only that it happens. Your neighbor might dig your grave, or your son, or no one, if they're all gone too. You won't be remembered in history books. Your name might fade within a generation, but you lived, you endured. You did what billions like you would do for centuries. Survive long enough for the world to move forward. So when people romanticize the Middle Ages, talk of simpler times and the good old days, you want to laugh, or cry, or scream, because those times were only simple in the way that starvation is simple, or illness, or pain. And they were only good for the few who owned everything and suffered little. For you, they were hard, unfair, relentless, but they were yours. And somehow, through filth and famine, plagues and prayers, execution and exhaustion, you made it through the day. In the stillness before dawn, a woman sat calmly in her chambers, her corset laced tight like a suit of armor, her breath steady as thunder echoed in the distance, not from the sky, but from the boots of soldiers marching in her name. The coup was in motion. Her husband, the Tsar, still asleep and unaware, would soon be deposed. By nightfall, she would wear the crown of the largest empire on earth. Not by birthright, not by luck, but by will. This is the story of how a foreign-born woman seized the Russian throne and refused to let go. Few rulers in history have reshaped a nation so thoroughly, or so defiantly, as Catherine the Great. Yet the path to that power was paved not with royal blood or inherited privilege, but with ambition, political calculation, and an almost ruthless understanding of human nature. She was not born Russian. She was not born to rule. She took power because no one else could hold it as she would, tightly, strategically, and with a vision that would outlast empires. Catherine was born Sophie Friedrich August von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729 in a small principality in what is now Germany. Her family was minor nobility, respectable, but not grand. Her father was a Prussian general, her mother a fiercely ambitious woman with connections to the Russian court. From an early age, young Sophie learned the dance of diplomacy. Her education was rigorous, her reading voracious. But most importantly, she understood people, their fears, their desires, their weaknesses. That instinct would become her sharpest weapon. In 1744, at just 14 years old, Sophie was summoned to Russia as a potential bride for the heir to the throne, the Grand Duke Peter, nephew of the ruling Empress Elizabeth. The match was strategic. Russia wanted closer ties with Prussia, and Sophie, young and Protestant, was a blank canvas upon which Russia could paint its future empress. She converted to Russian Orthodoxy, changed her name to Ekaterina, Catherine, and never looked back. From that moment on, she was Russian in name, dress, and ambition. But marriage to Peter was not salvation. It was a prison. Peter, later known as Peter III, was immature, erratic, and openly disdainful of Russia and its customs. He idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia and viewed his Russian subjects with contempt. Weiss, he showed little interest in Catherine, emotionally, politically, or romantically. Isolated in court, denied influence, and often humiliated by her husband, Catherine bided her time. And while she waited, she read history, philosophy, statecraft. She was not just surviving. She was preparing. Behind the velvet walls of the Winter Palace, alliances were quietly forged. Catherine charmed nobles, courted the military elite, and cultivated key friendships, most notably with the powerful Orloff brothers, including Grigory Orloff, her lover and a respected military commander. While Peter alienated the aristocracy and the church, Catherine became their hope. While he insulted the army, she gained their loyalty. By 1762, when Empress Elizabeth died and Peter finally ascended the throne, the seeds of rebellion were already in bloom. Peter's reign was short, just 6 months, but catastrophic. He withdrew Russia from the victorious 7 Years' War, ceding hard-won gains. He threatened to secularize church lands, insulted the Orthodox clergy, and paraded his admiration for Russia's enemies. In short, he made himself a target. And Catherine, with quiet precision, stepped into the void. The coup came in July 1762. With Peter away at a country palace, Catherine made her move. Supported by the military and key aristocrats, she rode to St. Petersburg and was proclaimed empress. She appeared in full military regalia, commanding, composed, and unmistakably sovereign. Peter, stunned and friendless, was arrested. Days later, he died under mysterious circumstances, likely murdered by Catherine's allies. Whether she ordered it directly remains a subject of historical debate, but one truth is clear. Catherine was now alone on the throne, with no one to challenge her. But seizing power was only half the battle. Could a foreign-born woman truly rule Russia? Would the nobility respect her, or merely tolerate her? Could she hold the empire together, or would she meet the same fate as her husband, discarded and forgotten? Catherine understood what many monarchs did not. That power obtained through intrigue could be lost just as easily. She could not remain a mere conspirator. She needed to become a ruler, not just in title, but in spirit. Not just by fear, but by vision. She moved swiftly to consolidate her reign. She rewarded her supporters with titles and land, reassured the nobility of their privileges, and quelled any whispers of dissent. But more than that, she set out to reinvent herself, and with her, the Russian monarchy. She began to craft a narrative. She was not the usurper. She was the savior, the enlightened empress, the philosopher queen who would bring order, justice, and progress to a vast, unwieldy empire. She invoked the names of Plato, Locke, and Voltaire. She spoke of reason, education, and reform. And in doing so, she wrapped her grip on the throne not in chains, but in ideals. In private, Catherine was shrewd and pragmatic. In public, she was dazzling. She used art, architecture, and spectacle to project strength. She understood image as power. Her court became a glittering center of intellect and culture, a place where European philosophers, scientists, and artists mingled with Russian nobles and foreign diplomats. Catherine, the once ignored German girl, now stood at the center of a cultural empire. Yet, even as she dazzled, she did not forget the blade. Her rule, while visionary, was also absolute. Dissent was watched, rebellions crushed, critics silenced. She ruled with a velvet glove, yes, but beneath it was iron. In many ways, her transformation from Sophie to Catherine was not a reinvention, but a revelation. The girl from Anhalt-Zerbst had always been observant, ambitious, and calculating. Russia didn't change her. It gave her the stage she needed. And once she claimed it, she never gave it back. In just a few short years, Catherine had achieved what seemed impossible. She had taken the throne without a drop of royal Russian blood. She had survived court intrigue, a disastrous marriage, and a violent coup. And now, she stood unchallenged at the head of one of the world's largest empires. But she wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. For Catherine, ruling wasn't the goal. Transforming, modernizing, mastering the empire was. Her story had only just begun. She wrote to Voltaire with the elegance of a philosopher, ruled her court like a general, and governed an empire with the precision of a chess master. While kings across Europe wore crowns by birth, Catherine the Great built her crown out of ideas. She didn't just rule Russia, she attempted to awaken it. Not with swords, but with books. Not by tradition, but by transformation. When Catherine the Great seized the Russian throne in 1762, she inherited a vast but fractured empire, culturally rich, geographically enormous, but socially stagnant and politically brittle. It was a land of illiteracy and superstition, where serfs toiled in fields they didn't own and nobles clung to power they didn't earn. Most Russian monarchs before her had chosen control over change. But Catherine envisioned something different. She saw Russia not just as a land to be ruled, but as a civilization to be sculpted. And the chisel she would use was the Enlightenment. From the beginning, Catherine admired the thinkers of 18th century Europe, especially the French philosophes who dared to question authority, challenge ignorance, and reimagine governance. While her predecessor Peter the Great had admired the uniforms and drills of Frederick the Great, Catherine idolized the minds of Voltaire, Montesquieu, Diderot, and Locke. She believed in rationality, education, and progress, and she believed that an empress could be both autocrat and intellectual steward of the people. But Russia was not France. It was not England. It was a feudal empire with a deeply conservative nobility, a powerful Orthodox church, and tens of millions of illiterate peasants. Enlightenment in Russia would have to be translated, not only linguistically, but politically, and Catherine would be the one holding the pen. She began her campaign not with a decree, but with a pen pal. In 1763, she initiated correspondence with the great Voltaire, whose wit and intellect dominated Enlightenment salons across Europe. Their letters would continue for over 15 years. Catherine flattered him, debated with him, even teased him, but always with purpose. She positioned herself as the enlightened despot, a monarch who ruled absolutely but with the heart of a philosopher. To Voltaire, she was a marvel. To herself, she was building legitimacy. But Catherine didn't stop at letters. In 1765, she extended an invitation to Denis Diderot, editor of the Encyclopédie, one of the most ambitious intellectual projects of the era. When Diderot arrived in St. Petersburg, he found an empress eager to listen. He spoke freely, even critically. Catherine, often patient, sometimes sharp, responded with the pragmatism of a ruler. "Your philosophy is brilliant," she said, "but I govern a nation, not a theory." Still, when Diderot faced financial hardship, Catherine bought his library and paid him to serve as its caretaker in France. Her support was not merely symbolic. It was strategic. Catherine's Enlightenment campaign had a centerpiece: legal reform. She believed that laws should be clear, rational, and rooted in justice. In 1767, she convened the Legislative Commission, an ambitious attempt to codify Russian law from the ground up. She invited over 500 delegates from across the empire, nobles, bureaucrats, even Cossacks, to draft a new legal code. To guide them, she wrote the Nakaz Instruction, a bold and sweeping political manifesto that revealed the mind of an empress reaching far beyond the traditions of Russian autocracy. The Nakaz was unlike anything Russia had seen. Drawing from Montesquieu, Beccaria, and others, it condemned torture, spoke of equality before the law, and suggested that sovereigns exist to serve their people. A nation must be governed by laws, she wrote, not by men. In a feudal monarchy, these were radical ideas. The document was so provocative that it was banned in France and criticized in Austria. But in Russia, It was hailed as visionary, even if largely theoretical. The Legislative Commission ultimately failed. Its delegates squabbled, regional interests clashed, and political will crumbled. Within 2 years, it was dissolved. But Catherine had achieved something greater than a legal code. She had positioned herself as a monarch who tried. The commission had been theater, yes, but it was also genuine engagement with modern governance. Education was another pillar of her vision. Catherine believed that an educated populace was not a threat to power but a path to a stronger state. She expanded secular education, built teacher training colleges, and in 1786 issued the Charter for the Education of Youth of Both Sexes, laying the groundwork for Russia's first national school system. She established the Smolny Institute, the first state-sponsored higher education institution for women in Europe. She believed girls should learn not only manners but mathematics, languages, and science. She also encouraged the spread of literature and printed works. Under her reign, the number of printing presses in Russia multiplied. New journals, pamphlets, and books circulated, many in translation from French or German. She saw the printing press not merely as a tool of culture, but as an instrument of governance. Ideas, she believed, could shape nations if wielded wisely. Yet even as Catherine championed Enlightenment ideals, she remained bound by the realities of empire. Her commitment to serfdom, or at least to not abolishing it, reveals the limits of her vision. In theory, she believed in liberty and justice. In practice, she needed the loyalty of the nobility, who derived their wealth from owning human labor. In the wake of the Pugachev Rebellion, which we'll explore in depth later, Catherine moved further away from liberating the serfs, tightening control instead. Reform, she learned, was a candle that burned quickly in the Russian wind. Still, her balancing act was masterful. She was a philosopher in the salons of Paris and an autocrat in the palaces of Moscow. She walked both worlds, Enlightenment thinker and empress of an ancient empire. She used Enlightenment language to strengthen autocracy rather than dismantle it. If that seems contradictory, it was. But Catherine understood something crucial, that idealism alone does not build empires. Strategy does. In her private notes and letters, Catherine often wrote of her frustrations with Russia's backwardness, its superstition, its bureaucracy, its resistance to reform. But she never turned her back on it. She saw herself not as a European ruling Russia, but as a Russian reshaping Russia in a modern image. Not a French copy, a Russian original. Catherine's Enlightenment was neither pure nor perfect. It was adapted, filtered, and often compromised. But it was real. Her court became a center of cultural life, her reign an era of literary and philosophical growth. Under her influence, Russia began to see itself not just as a geographic behemoth, but as a civilization capable of thought, beauty, and vision. She understood that power was not simply what you held in your hand, but what you placed in the minds of others. She didn't just read Enlightenment philosophy. She lived it, on her terms, in her language, and for her empire. She spoke of justice, but signed laws that bound millions to the land. She admired Voltaire, but silenced critics. She expanded education, yet strengthened serfdom. Catherine the Great didn't abandon her ideals. She negotiated with them, and in doing so, she taught the world a brutal truth. Even the most enlightened ruler must sometimes serve the darkness to keep the throne. Catherine the Great did not rule in a vacuum of philosophy. She ruled in Russia, a vast, volatile empire stitched together by contradictions. Enlightenment thinkers across Europe were theorizing about liberty, rights, and the social contract. But Russia in the 18th century was not Paris or Geneva. It was a land of sprawling estates and frozen frontiers, where 90% of the population were serfs, legally tied to the land, controlled by landowners, and considered property more than people. This was the empire Catherine inherited, and it presented her with a question that would haunt her entire reign. How do you reform a country whose power structure depends on the very injustices you want to change? From the moment she seized power in 1762, Catherine's public persona was built around the ideals of progress. She quoted Enlightenment thinkers, wrote about rational governance, and called herself a servant of the state. But behind the scenes, she understood something even more important, that her power and the stability of the Russian Empire depended on the loyalty of the nobility. And the nobility, quite simply, liked their serfs exactly where they were. In many ways, Catherine's reign was a masterclass in political balancing. On one hand, she sought to modernize Russia, to bring in science, secular education, codified law, and cultural sophistication. On the other, she had to preserve the feudal structure that allowed the upper classes to maintain their wealth and power. Reform was not a luxury. It was a threat, unless carefully managed. The Enlightenment may have lived in her letters, but survival lived in her decrees. After the failure of the Legislative Commission in the 1760s, Catherine pivoted. She realized that grand legal reforms were less important than practical ones. She needed to modernize administration, improve infrastructure, and build institutions, without tearing apart the social order. And so, she began a quiet revolution from within. She reorganized provincial governments, creating more efficient bureaucratic structures to collect taxes and maintain order. She standardized weights and measures, introduced civil service exams, and restructured municipal governments. She wasn't dismantling the autocracy, she was fine-tuning it. One of her most notable reforms was the Charter to the Nobility, issued in 1785. This document formalized the privileges of the noble class, granting them legal immunity from corporal punishment, rights over their serfs, and greater autonomy in local affairs. To Enlightenment purists, this was a betrayal, but to Catherine, it was a necessity. The charter was a deal. In exchange for political loyalty, the nobles received legal power. With their support secured, she could proceed with broader reforms, as long as those reforms didn't touch the foundation of their privilege. Education remained one of her favorite tools of reform. She expanded public schooling, opened teacher training centers, and created secular curriculum models inspired by European academies. She founded the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens, Russia's first school for girls, and promoted education as a path to civic virtue. But even here, class boundaries were sharp. These schools were largely for the elite. Serf children remained illiterate, excluded, and invisible. Catherine also understood the power of image. She built libraries, theaters, and art collections. The Hermitage Museum, today one of the greatest in the world, began as her private collection of Enlightenment treasures. Her court became a glittering hub of intellectual and artistic life, designed to impress Western Europe and elevate Russia's cultural prestige. Yet for all this splendor, the empire beneath her feet remained deeply unequal. And Catherine knew it. She once wrote that serfdom was a disgrace to humanity. Yet during her reign, serfdom not only continued, it expanded. As the empire grew into new territories, Crimea, parts of Poland, and lands along the Black Sea, serfdom followed like a shadow. She granted newly conquered land to loyal nobles, allowing them to impose serfdom where none had existed before. This contradiction, an empress who praised liberty while institutionalizing bondage, has long puzzled historians. But Catherine was not confused. She was calculating. She understood the delicate balance between ideology and order. Russia, she often said, must not be reformed too quickly. Change had to be digested in pieces. A single revolt, a single failed harvest, could undo decades of progress. And so, she moved with caution, not because she lacked conviction, but because she understood the terrain. Nothing revealed this more than her response to rebellion. In 1773, a Cossack named Emelian Pugachev claimed to be Peter III, Catherine's dead husband, and launched a peasant revolt that swept across the Volga River region. Pugachev promised to abolish serfdom, reduce taxes, and restore justice. Tens of thousands joined him, serfs, Cossacks, old believers, all driven by desperation. The uprising terrified Catherine. For all her reforms, she had never seen her people rise against her on such a scale. Cities fell. Nobles were slaughtered. The illusion of harmony cracked. Catherine responded with overwhelming force. Her generals crushed the rebellion, and Pugachev was captured, displayed in an iron cage, and executed in public. The message was clear: enlightenment would not be permitted to become anarchy. After the rebellion, Catherine doubled down on control. Surveillance increased. Censorship tightened. Her policies became more conservative, her reforms more calculated. She reaffirmed the nobility's power over their serfs, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. The Pugachev rebellion had exposed the limits of enlightenment in a feudal society. Philosophy alone could not hold an empire together. But even as she compromised, Catherine never fully abandoned her ideals. She continued to write, read, and debate. She hosted philosophers and artists. She championed inoculation, science, and intellectual curiosity. In her heart, she remained a reformer, but one with a sword in her hand. This is what made Catherine unique. She didn't govern from fantasy. She governed from reality, a reality she shaped, bent, and sometimes hardened to keep the machine running. She once described her role as a tightrope walker balancing over a pit. That metaphor defined her reign. She could not free the serfs without risking collapse. She could not create equality without dismantling the nobility. So instead, she moved between the worlds, a philosopher in Paris, a ruler in Moscow, and a survivor in the halls of power. In the end, Catherine's reforms were vast but selective. She modernized the Russian state, brought it closer to Europe intellectually and culturally, and laid the groundwork for future transformation. But she also entrenched the power of the elite, expanded oppression, and kept millions in chains. Realpolitik is not about purity. It's about power, and Catherine wielded it like a scalpel, cutting where necessary, retreating when needed, always calculating the cost. Her enlightenment was not utopian. It was functional, not ideal, but real. And in the raw calculus of history, that may have been her most enduring lesson. She didn't just wear the crown, she redrew the map. Where most monarchs defended borders, Catherine the Great erased them, one campaign at a time. She turned Russia from a European shadow into a continental force. Her armies marched with cannon and code, her treaties as sharp as sabers. Empire was not her inheritance. It was her project, and the world would not look the same again. For Catherine the Great, power was never static. It expanded, and so must the empire that wielded it. From the moment she secured the throne, she saw the Russian Empire not as a final form, but as a base, a giant to be grown, shaped, and pushed into the ranks of true global empires. The battlefield, for Catherine, was more than blood and steel. It was where vision met geography, and under her reign, the boundaries of Russia shifted with calculated force. By the end of her 34-year reign, Russia had grown by more than 200,000 square miles. That expansion wasn't accidental. It was Catherine's strategy. She didn't just want to strengthen Russia, she wanted it to dominate, to be feared by its enemies, admired by its allies, and understood not as the distant, backward land of old, but as a true European superpower. Her imperial ambition had two main theaters, southward against the Ottoman Empire and westward through the partitioning of Poland. Each campaign combined military strength, diplomatic manipulation, and ideological justification. Catherine waged war not only for land, but for legitimacy. Each conquest added another layer to her myth, and another scar to the map of Europe. Let's begin in the south. The Ottoman Empire had long been a rival of Russia, controlling crucial access to the Black Sea and holding sway over millions of Orthodox Christians living under Muslim rule. Catherine saw both a threat and an opportunity. If she could defeat the Ottomans, she would not only gain warm water ports, long desired by the Russian state, but also position herself as the defender of Orthodox faith and the rightful guardian of Eastern Europe. Her first war against the Ottomans began in 1768, just 6 years into her reign. The cause was political and complex, but the goal was simple: control. Russian forces, led by General Pyotr Rumyantsev, scored major victories in the Balkans and along the Dniester River. In 1770, the Russian fleet, which had sailed from the Baltic to the Mediterranean, achieved a stunning naval victory at the Battle of Kesma, destroying much of the Ottoman fleet. It was both strategic and symbolic. Russia, the once landlocked northern kingdom, was now a sea power. Catherine's generals proved formidable. Alexander Suvorov, one of the greatest military minds in Russian history, led brutal and brilliant campaigns against both Ottoman and rebellious forces. With each success, the Russian military grew bolder, more professionalized, and more respected. But perhaps no general would have more influence on Catherine's southern ambitions than Grigory Potemkin, her former lover, trusted advisor, and in many ways, co-ruler. Together, Catherine and Potemkin devised not just conquests, but visions of colonization. After the 1774 Treaty of Kukuk-Kinarka, which granted Russia access to the Black Sea and allowed it to protect Orthodox Christians in Ottoman lands, the groundwork was laid for deeper incursions. Catherine and Potemkin didn't just want military victories. They wanted settlements, cities, and infrastructure. Their grandest achievement came in Crimea, annexed by Russia in 1783 after years of manipulation and military pressure. Crimea had been a vassal of the Ottomans for centuries. Its absorption was not just a geopolitical win, it was a psychological one. Russia now had warm water ports, including Sevastopol, and a naval base that would shape history for centuries. Catherine declared it a triumph of civilization. The Ottoman Empire saw it as an existential threat. But conquest was only part of the plan. The real genius of Potemkin and of Catherine's imperial model was colonization. They built new cities in the south, Kherson, Simferopol, and Odessa, designed to reflect Enlightenment ideals and Russian might. Settlers, including Germans and Greeks, were invited to develop farmland. Roads, fortresses, ports, and theaters sprang up across the newly acquired territories. The steppe became a stage, with Catherine as director. In 1787, she even staged a legendary tour of the newly acquired lands, the so-called Tauride Journey. Dressed in dazzling military regalia, surrounded by nobles, foreign diplomats, and thousands of soldiers, Catherine traveled through Crimea and the southern frontier to showcase her achievements. Potemkin orchestrated elaborate displays, villages, theaters, feasts, designed to impress visiting dignitaries, including the Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II. Critics would later call them Potemkin villages, facades of prosperity. But the symbolism was powerful. The empress had not only one land. She was building a new empire from the ground up. Even as she expanded southward, Catherine's eyes turned west, to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, a once great kingdom now weakened by internal strife and foreign meddling. Catherine had a long history with Poland. She had helped place Stanislaw August Poniatowski, her former lover, on the Polish throne. But Poland's fractured political system and increasing calls for reform made it ripe for exploitation. Along with Austria and Prussia, Catherine participated in a series of 3 partitions of Poland in 1772, 1793, and 1795. Each time, the great powers sliced away chunks of Polish territory under the guise of restoring order or maintaining balance. In truth, it was opportunistic imperialism. Catherine's role was decisive. By the end of the third partition, Poland had ceased to exist as an independent state. Russia absorbed vast territories, parts of modern-day Belarus, Lithuania, and Ukraine, bringing millions of new subjects under Catherine's rule. Many were Catholic, non-Russian, and often resistant. But Catherine's vision was not ethnic. It was imperial. Her goal was not assimilation, but control. These acquisitions served both strategic and ideological purposes. Strategically, they gave Russia buffer zones against Western Europe. Ideologically, they allowed Catherine to frame herself as a civilizing force, bringing order and enlightenment to chaotic lands. In private, she may have acknowledged the iron hand behind her rule, but in public, she was the mother of nations. Catherine also used diplomacy as a weapon. She played European courts like a master conductor. She navigated alliances, outmaneuvered rivals, and projected an image of Russia as modern, sophisticated, and enlightened. Even as her armies marched through foreign fields, her letters to monarchs, her patronage of intellectuals, and her performance at diplomatic events were all part of a larger campaign to make Russia impossible to ignore. By the end of her reign, Russia's map had changed forever. Its southern borders now touched the Black Sea. Its western edge stretched deep into what had once been Central Europe. Internally, the empire had grown more complex, with diverse peoples, religions, and tensions. But externally, it was stronger, wealthier, and more respected than ever before. Critics accused Catherine of imperialism, and rightly so. She believed in destiny, Russia's destiny to rule, expand, and civilize. But for her, expansion wasn't greed. It was mission. Her motto wasn't conquest for conquest's sake. It was order, culture, and power. She didn't just conquer land. She colonized ideas. In her southern conquests, she reshaped borders and founded cities. In Poland, she dismantled a kingdom. In diplomacy, she rewrote the rules. Few rulers in European history have had such a lasting impact on the physical and political map. Catherine began her reign by seizing a crown in a coup. She ended it by doubling the empire. Her enemies feared her. Her allies watched her. Her people, whether in Moscow or Crimea, lived in the shadow of her ambition. For Catherine the Great, peace was only the pause between victories. An empire was not something inherited. It was something built, campaign by campaign, treaty by treaty, city by city. In the candlelit corridors of the Winter Palace, where velvet drapes, muffled whispers, and boots echoed across marble, rumors thrived louder than edicts. She was the most powerful woman in the world, yet never alone, never fully trusted, and never fully understood. Behind her crown was a heart that beat with dangerous passion. And behind every lover was a political calculation. Catherine the Great didn't separate her bedroom from her throne. She ruled from both. Catherine the Great's reign was not merely a chronicle of war and policy. It was also a story of flesh and desire, of carefully chosen lovers who were more than romantic indulgences. They were symbols, advisors, confidants, and sometimes pawns. Catherine lived in a world that expected queens to be modest and untouchable. She defied that. She embraced her desires. And in doing so, she wielded one of the most dangerous weapons available to a female monarch, her sexuality. She had no interest in pretending to be the virgin ideal so many European courts imposed on their queens. Catherine was powerful, passionate, and unapologetic. She had lovers, not one or two, but a parade of them over the course of her life. Some lasted years, others months, but all had one thing in common. They were chosen by her, on her terms. Her critics, of course, were relentless. In Europe's drawing rooms and pamphlet presses, Catherine was painted as a lustful empress with a harem of young men. Satirical cartoons depicted her in absurd and degrading ways. After her death, the grotesque and entirely false rumor that she died while attempting to have intercourse with a horse spread like wildfire, a misogynistic slander that sought to undo her legacy with one image. But behind the scandal, there was structure. Catherine's love life was not chaotic. It was choreographed. Her lovers were often young, handsome, and ambitious, but also educated, politically capable, and often selected with input from trusted advisors. These men were not simply romantic companions. They were extensions of her rule, and when they no longer serve a purpose, she dismissed them, gently, often generously, but always finally. Among the most important of these was Grigory Potemkin, perhaps the greatest love of her life. Their relationship was as complex as the empire they governed. Potemkin was more than a courtier. He was a visionary, a military genius, and a man with whom Catherine shared not only affection but ideas. They may have even married in secret, a theory supported by correspondence between them that reads like love letters one moment and political memos the next. Their bond was one of equals, rare for Catherine, rarer still in any royal court. Potemkin helped her govern vast regions, especially in the south after the annexation of Crimea. He led military campaigns, organized colonies, and built cities in her name. Even after their romantic relationship faded, their political partnership remained strong. When he died in 1791, Catherine mourned him not just as a former lover, but as a co-ruler. Others came and went more quickly. Grigory Orlov, one of the brothers who helped her seize the throne, was her first major lover as empress. Handsome and brave, he was rewarded with titles and influence, but eventually fell from favor, replaced by younger, more compelling companions. Orlov faded into the background, married quietly, and received a handsome estate for his loyalty. Catherine didn't punish her past. She pensioned it off. Then came Alexander Vasilchikov, a polished courtier known for his good looks and empty conversation. Catherine found him charming, but dull. He was eventually dismissed and received a generous estate and lifelong pension for his trouble. The pattern continued. Catherine's lovers became a rotation, carefully vetted, temporarily powerful, and politely dismissed when their time had passed. She maintained a discreet but well-organized system for selecting and managing her companions. Court rumors speak of a trusted noblewoman who interviewed candidates before presenting them to the empress. If selected, the man would receive a private apartment, titles, income, and influence for as long as he remained interesting and loyal. Once the spark faded, the empress would end the affair gracefully, never cruelly, but always decisively. This may sound transactional. In many ways it was. But Catherine was not cold. She wrote tenderly to her favorites, laughed with them, trusted them. She offered love, intimacy, and power, but always made it clear that the state came first. She never let personal feeling interfere with political strategy. In that, she outmaneuvered most kings. Her romantic relationships were also deeply tied to her identity as a woman in power. Male rulers had mistresses without consequence. Their indulgences were often celebrated. But for Catherine, every lover was an opportunity for scandal. Her gender made her vulnerability more dangerous and her autonomy more threatening. And yet she didn't hide. She didn't apologize. She refused to be shamed into submission. Her relationships were public enough to be acknowledged, but private enough to be managed. In this way, Catherine navigated the narrow space allowed to women in power and expanded it through sheer will. Europe couldn't handle her. They admired her intellect, feared her army, respected her vision, but they couldn't reconcile it with her femininity. To them, a woman with power and lovers was unnatural. To Catherine, it was perfectly rational. She believed pleasure was a natural part of life, and that emotional relationships didn't have to interfere with political responsibilities. In fact, her personal relationships often reinforced her rule. Her lovers were loyal. They served as aides, commanders, and envoys. She surrounded herself with men who served her in both private and public arenas. This blending of intimacy and governance was not a weakness. It was her strategy. Catherine's diaries and letters reveal a woman who thought deeply about love, desire, and loyalty. She saw herself as emotionally intense, capable of great affection, but also intellectually disciplined. She loved, but she did not lose herself in love. She ruled, even in the most private chambers. One could argue that her lovers were Catherine's court, curated, rotated, and kept within her orbit. They were symbols of her dominance, her independence, and her refusal to be defined by conventional femininity. She didn't belong to anyone. Not her husband, not her lovers, not the court. The scandal around Catherine's personal life also served a broader purpose: distraction. While Europe gossiped about her bedroom, she conquered Crimea. While courtiers whispered about her latest lover, she redrew the Polish border. While satirists mocked her libido, she modernized Russian law. She allowed the rumors to swirl because they obscured the truth. She was working harder than any monarch in Europe. Catherine never shied away from passion, but she never allowed it to weaken her rule. Her affairs were chosen, managed, and ended with precision. She was both woman and monarch, and she refused to surrender either identity. Her critics tried to reduce her to scandal, but history has remembered her for far more. For her intellect, her reforms, her victories. And even those who mocked her could not deny her power. She ruled from the throne and from the heart, but always unmistakably on her terms. In 1773, a bearded man rode out of the southern steppe with fire in his eyes and a lie on his lips. He claimed to be the murdered Tsar, Peter III, risen from the grave to reclaim his crown and free the people. And the people believed him. What followed was not just a rebellion. It was a reckoning. Catherine the Great, the philosopher empress, would find herself tested not by kings or armies, but by the rage of her own forgotten people. The Pugachev rebellion was not simply a revolt. It was a rupture, a violent eruption of centuries of suffering, fed by famine, fueled by desperation, and set ablaze by a man who claimed the impossible. For Catherine, it was a nightmare in broad daylight. Not a war she could wage with diplomacy or Enlightenment rhetoric, but a civil explosion that exposed the fragile foundations beneath her empire's grandeur. The rebellion was led by Yemelyan Pugachev, a former Don Cossack who had served in the Russian military but abandoned his post. In a world where rumors moved faster than horses, he re-emerged in 1773 with a story so absurd it seemed divine. He claimed to be Peter III, Catherine's long-dead husband. According to Pugachev, the Tsar had survived the coup, escaped captivity, and now returned to deliver the Russian people, particularly the serfs, from their suffering. The lie was outrageous. Peter III had been overthrown and killed more than a decade earlier. But truth was irrelevant. For millions of peasants, especially in Russia's remote southern and eastern regions, the details of court life were shadows on a wall. What mattered was the promise Pugachev made: freedom, land, justice, and vengeance. He spoke directly to the voiceless, to the serfs chained to land they did not own, to the Cossacks angered by imperial control, to the old believers persecuted for religious dissent, to the ethnic minorities pushed to the empire's margins. Pugachev's rhetoric was fiery, his timing perfect. The empire was overstretched, the bureaucracy sluggish. Famine and poverty gnawed at the countryside. What began as a local insurrection along the Yaik River quickly ballooned into the largest peasant revolt in Russian history. By the end of 1773, Pugachev had tens of thousands of followers. Fortresses were captured, cities taken, nobles executed, government officials mutilated. Entire regions fell under rebel control. The empire, so proud and vast on paper, suddenly looked vulnerable. Catherine was horrified. She had spent more than a decade projecting strength, building cities, cultivating philosophers, conquering Crimea. But now, a ragged pretender with a false crown was marching across her heartland. This was not a foreign invasion. It was a revolt from within, a mirror held to the face of Russia, showing its cruelty, inequality, and rot. Her first instinct was disbelief, then faith, then action. She dispatched elite military forces under experienced generals, including Alexander Suvorov, to crush the uprising. The Russian army, better trained and equipped than any rebel force, began a brutal campaign of suppression. Towns were retaken, rebel camps burned, civilians suspected of sympathy were hanged or flogged. Entire villages were razed. By September 1774, Pugachev had been betrayed by his own followers, captured, and sent to Moscow in an iron cage. There, he was displayed publicly, a living symbol of defiance crushed, before being beheaded and quartered in the city square. The spectacle was meant to terrify. It worked. But the rebellion had left its mark. Over 10,000 people had died. Dozens of towns were destroyed. And Catherine's image, the enlightened empress, the reformer, the mother of Russia, had cracked. She emerged from the rebellion not softer, but harder. In the years that followed, her policies shifted dramatically. She had once spoken of abolishing serfdom. Now, she dropped the subject entirely. She had once dreamed of an egalitarian legal code. Now, she reinforced the very hierarchies that rebellion had threatened. The nobles, who had remained loyal during the revolt, were rewarded with even greater control over their serfs. Their rights were expanded. The serfs' hopes were buried. Where enlightenment had once guided her pen, order now guided her sword. Catherine also tightened censorship. Books that even hinted at revolution or reform were banned. Foreign works were monitored. Secret police expanded. Surveillance became more systematic. Dissent, even whispered, became dangerous. She may have continued to write to philosophers and fund the arts, but her gaze had sharpened. She no longer believed that ideals alone could shape Russia, not when the price of reform was rebellion. Yet, even as she clamped down, she never admitted defeat. In her letters, she portrayed Pugachev not as a political consequence, but as a criminal madman. She refused to acknowledge the systemic oppression that had fueled his rise. The problem, in her mind, was not serfdom. It was ungrateful ignorance. But the truth is more complex. The Pugachev rebellion exposed what Catherine's reforms had failed to reach, the bottom. While she modernized courts and universities, the vast majority of her subjects lived in medieval conditions, uneducated, overworked, abused, and silenced. To them, Catherine's enlightenment was a distant fantasy. They saw palaces, not progress. And Pugachev gave them a voice, however briefly. The rebellion also revealed the paradox of Catherine's rule. She governed in the name of reason, but her empire rested on coercion. She loved books but feared the people who could not read them. She wanted justice, but preserved inequality. She saw herself as the guardian of civilization, but often ruled through violence and fear. And yet, she remained on the throne. Because even after the rebellion, Catherine retained the loyalty of the elite, the generals, governors, nobles, and bureaucrats who mattered most. She strengthened institutions, expanded the military, and restored order. She didn't fall. She adapted. This, in many ways, is where Catherine's enlightenment ended. Not in philosophy, but in pragmatism. She would still fund schools, sponsor science, and collect art. But she would no longer pretend that ideas alone could hold an empire together. The Enlightenment had promised a rational world. Pugachev reminded her it was still a brutal one. Catherine's dream of freeing the serfs, if ever truly sincere, died in 1774. After that, she spoke less of liberty and more of loyalty. Her reforms became top-down and symbolic. She ruled not as a philosopher queen, but as an emperor in all but name. In private, she mourned the betrayal, not of Pugachev, but of the people themselves. She had wanted to raise them. They had risen against her. And so, she did what rulers do. She protected her throne. She silenced dissent. And she learned that power may wear a crown of ideas, but it must still walk in boots. By the time she neared her death, Catherine the Great had outlived her enemies, silenced rebellions, conquered empires, and immortalized her name. She ruled with more clarity and command than most kings of her age. But beneath the marble statues, gilded ceilings, and Enlightenment libraries lay a question that haunted the corridors of her court. Was she the reformer she once dreamed of becoming, or the autocrat she swore she'd never become? Catherine the Great ruled for 34 years, the longest reign of any female leader in Russian history. And those years changed the Russian Empire in profound ways. She expanded its territory by over 200,000 square miles, annexed Crimea, redrew the borders of Poland, and made Russia a dominant player in European politics. She corresponded with philosophers, amassed one of Europe's greatest art collections, and laid the cultural foundations of modern Russia. But by the 1780s and 1790s, the idealist empress who once wrote of equality and law was now ruling like a seasoned pragmatist, cautious, guarded, and increasingly conservative. The contradiction was stark. She brought the Enlightenment to Russia, but left serfdom intact. She promoted reason, but expanded censorship. She funded education for noble women, but left peasant girls illiterate. Her reign became a study in brilliance shadowed by compromise. And Catherine, ever self-aware, knew it. In her later years, her writings became more guarded. She continued to write memoirs and policy papers, but the optimism of her early years gave way to a clear-eyed realism. Russia was a beast that could not be tamed quickly. Its aristocracy was entrenched. Its people were unprepared for freedom. Change, she had learned, must not outpace obedience. One of her greatest personal frustrations was her son and heir, Paul. Catherine distrusted him from the start. She had excluded him from power during her reign, fearing that he was impulsive, reactionary, and dangerously idealistic in the wrong ways. She believed he would undo her progress and reverse her policies. Their relationship was cold and strained. She considered bypassing him altogether in the succession, possibly favoring her grandson Alexander, whom she helped raise. But Catherine died before she could formally name a new heir, and Paul inherited the throne in 1796, just weeks after her death. The irony was bitter. The woman who had seized the crown through a coup, who had ruled with unmatched foresight and control, had no control over what came next. But in life, Catherine had created legacies far deeper than succession. Her cultural contributions were enormous. Under her patronage, the Hermitage Museum grew into a jewel of European art. She acquired thousands of paintings, sculptures, and rare books, including Diderot's personal library, and used her collection as a tool of diplomacy and prestige. Foreign ambassadors toured her galleries, amazed not only by the art but by the idea that a Russian empress could rival the salons of Paris and Vienna. Catherine also modernized urban life. She invested in roads, public buildings, and sanitation. She improved the structure of provincial governments and codified administrative laws. Cities like Odessa, Kherson, and Simferopol, born from her southern conquests, became symbols of her ambition to transform the empire from a medieval land to a modern state. She championed education, especially for women. The Smolny Institute became a model for female education in Europe, and Catherine advocated for curriculum that included mathematics, literature, and science. She believed educated women made better citizens, better mothers, and, crucially, more stable contributors to the state. Yet for all her progressivism, Catherine's Russia remained a society of extremes. The nobility grew wealthier and more powerful, especially after Catherine formalized their rights with a charter to the nobility in 1785. This charter gave nobles broad autonomy over their estates, legal immunity, and official recognition of their status as the ruling class. Meanwhile, the serfs sank deeper into exploitation. In some regions, serfs were sold without land, branded, and even used as currency. In newly acquired territories like Ukraine and Belarus, Catherine extended serfdom into areas where it had previously been limited, effectively spreading the very system she had once criticized. This was the most glaring contradiction of her reign. She had written, in her knackers, of the injustice of torture and inequality. But after the Pugachev Rebellion, she allowed brutality to become state policy. She spoke of liberty, but tightened surveillance. She championed education, but not for all. In foreign policy, Catherine's legacy was equally complex. She was a master of diplomacy, often playing Austria and Prussia against one another, exploiting the weakness of the Ottoman Empire, and inserting Russia into European power games with startling finesse. The partitions of Poland were perhaps her most cynical achievement. Alongside Frederick the Great of Prussia and the Habsburgs of Austria, she orchestrated the dismemberment of an entire nation, a kingdom weakened by internal strife but still sovereign. By the Third Partition in 1795, Poland no longer existed. Russia gained vast territories and millions of new subjects, many of them Catholic, ethnically diverse, and resentful. Catherine justified these moves as necessary for regional stability and the protection of Orthodox Christians. But in reality, they were acts of imperial aggression. Even some Enlightenment thinkers criticized her. But Catherine did not flinch. She believed in destiny, and for her, Russia's destiny was expansion. In her personal life, Catherine remained intellectually sharp into her final years. She wrote, read, and governed until the day she died. But she was also lonely. Many of her closest friends and lovers had died. Potemkin, her great partner in both love and empire, passed in 1791, leaving a void she never truly filled. She surrounded herself with courtiers, but trusted few. The court was full of flattery and faction, and Catherine, though adored, knew how quickly affection could sour. Despite all of this, or perhaps because of it, she never stopped working. Her daily schedule was legendary. She rose before dawn, read reports from across the empire, edited laws, responded to correspondence, and managed both domestic policy and foreign affairs. Even her critics admired her stamina. She didn't just sit on the throne. She worked it like a stateswoman, tirelessly and with unmatched intellect. On November 6, 1796, Catherine the Great died of a stroke at the age of 67. She passed away in the Winter Palace, the center of her power for over 3 decades. Her death shocked the court, though few had believed she would live much longer. She had ruled for so long that her presence had seemed eternal. Her body was placed beside that of her despised husband, Peter III, a final irony. But her legacy stood far apart. Catherine left Russia larger, wealthier, and more globally relevant than it had ever been. She failed to free the serfs, yes. She bowed to the nobility, certainly. But she also reshaped the culture, elevated education, expanded borders, and redefined what a woman could be in power. She was flawed, often hypocritical, but also brilliant, bold, and relentlessly effective. She was not the perfect monarch. She was the possible one. And perhaps, in the brutal theater of empire, that was the greatest accomplishment of all. Deep in the jungle, beneath the crumbling face of a forgotten pyramid, archaeologists opened a stone tomb untouched for over 1,300 years. What they found was not gold, not jewels, but something more haunting. The remains of a woman stained in red, her face hidden behind a jade mask, her body surrounded by offerings. No name, no inscriptions, just silence, scarlet dust, and the echo of a power that refused to fade. She was nameless, and yet unforgettable. She was the Red Queen. In 1994, beneath the dense canopy of the Chiapas rainforest in southern Mexico, a team of Mexican archaeologists led by Fanny Lopez Jimenez stumbled upon what would become one of the most enigmatic discoveries in Mesoamerican archaeology. They were surveying Temple 13, an unassuming structure next to the more famous Temple of the Inscriptions, burial site of the great Maya King Kinich Pakal, also known as Pakal the Great. No one expected much from Temple 13. It was smaller, less elaborate, and had long been overshadowed by its imposing neighbor. But something drew Lopez Jimenez's team deeper. Beneath the temple floor, they found a sealed crypt, untouched, unlooted, and completely isolated. Inside was a limestone sarcophagus. When they lifted the lid, a red cloud rose from the tomb like smoke from a long-extinguished fire. The air was thick with cinnabar, powdered mercury sulfide, highly toxic and deeply sacred to the ancient Maya. Every surface inside was dusted red. The bones, the walls, the offerings, even a mask that still rested on the face of the skeleton. Inside lay the remains of a woman. She was not buried casually. Her body had been placed with care, laid atop jaguar pelts, sacred symbols of power in the underworld. She wore a jade funerary mask, earrings, necklaces, and bracelets made of jade and shell. Surrounding her were bone needles, obsidian blades, and ceramic vessels. The tomb was a ritual space, heavy with symbolic meaning. There were no inscriptions identifying her, no glyphs on the walls, no name carved into the sarcophagus. But the richness of the burial left no doubt. This woman had been someone important. Archaeologists and the media quickly dubbed her the Red Queen, a name that evoked both her scarlet-covered remains and her unmistakable royal status. Who was she? Theories emerged almost immediately. The most widely accepted hypothesis is that she was Tiziakbu Ajah, the wife of Pakal the Great, one of the most powerful rulers in the history of the Maya city-state of Palenque. Pakal's reign in the 7th century CE marked a golden age for Palenque, a period of architectural brilliance, political stability, and religious innovation. His tomb in the Temple of the Inscriptions is one of the most iconic in the ancient world, famous for its carved lid depicting Pakal's descent into the underworld and his rebirth as a divine being. The Red Queen was buried just a few meters away from him. This proximity, combined with the elaborate funerary treatment, strongly suggests that she was his queen, not just a consort, but a spiritual and political partner. And yet, no definitive proof has been found. In the early 2000s, scientists conducted DNA tests to compare her remains with those of Pekel. The results were inconclusive. They shared no maternal bloodline, ruling out mother or sister. But that did not rule out marriage, as marital ties don't produce shared mitochondrial DNA. Other candidates have been suggested. Pekel's mother, Sak-Kuk, who ruled as queen regent during his youth, or perhaps a high priestess, someone with immense ritual authority. But the evidence continues to favor Tizakbu-Ajah, who is known from inscriptions to have held significant ceremonial power and bore multiple sons who became nobles. In Maya society, royal women held more power than commonly assumed. They weren't merely wives. They were priestesses, dynastic linchpins, and often co-rulers. They participated in bloodletting rituals, led religious ceremonies, and oversaw governance when kings were absent or underage. The Red Queen's burial confirms this reality. Her tomb was not just luxurious, it was cosmic. The use of cinnabar was not decorative. It was transformational. Among the ancient Maya, red was the color of blood, life, and resurrection. Covering a body in powdered cinnabar was a sacred act, designed to symbolically bleed the body into the earth, uniting it with the underworld gods and preparing the soul for rebirth. Pekel had been buried in a similar fashion. That both he and the Red Queen were wrapped in red powder and placed in monumental tombs suggests that she was not merely accompanying him in death. She was equal in cosmic significance. The jade funerary mask placed on her face is especially telling. In Maya belief, jade represented life, force, breath, and the green vitality of maize, the sacred crop. Masks served not just as protection, but as spiritual vessels through which the deceased could be reborn, recognized by the gods, and transformed into divine ancestors. Her mask was a mosaic, made of tiny jade tiles, carefully arranged to mimic the features of her skull. It is at once intimate and transcendent, a symbol of personal identity, social status, and cosmic preparation. The tomb's layout also holds meaning. It was sealed, private, unmarked. No public rituals were performed here. This was not a space of state ceremony. It was spiritual intimacy, a burial meant for deification, not memory. This silence is both powerful and tragic. Unlike Pekel, whose name and story were carved in stone, the Red Queen remains unnamed. Her legacy lives in color, artifact, and ritual, not in language. But perhaps that's the point. Maya cosmology emphasized ritual over inscription, transformation over memory. Her name may be lost, but her burial speaks louder than most monuments. She was wrapped in symbolism, drenched in the sacred, and placed beside a god king. To the Maya, that was immortality. In the years since her discovery, the Red Queen has become a figure of fascination. Artists have reimagined her face. Scholars have debated her identity. Tourists visit her reconstructed tomb at the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. Yet even as we learn more, the mystery deepens. The Red Queen challenges our understanding of Maya gender roles, of royal power, and of death itself. She reminds us that ancient civilizations were far more complex than we assume, and that women, often erased by time, shaped empires in ways we are still beginning to uncover. Her body may have crumbled. Her name may be forgotten. But her story, layered in dust, jade, and silence, continues to rise from the jungle like the temples that once crowned her city. She's not just a relic. She is a revelation. History often remembers kings. Their names are carved in stone, their deeds recorded in glyphs. But behind every king stood women who bled, ruled, brokered, and prayed. In Maya civilization, queens were not simply wives. They were dynastic engines, spiritual conduits, and political architects. Their power was not always proclaimed, but it was always present, and sometimes it was buried in red. To understand the Red Queen, we must understand the world she came from, a world far more intricate and gender-fluid than many assume. The ancient Maya, known for their towering pyramids, intricate calendar systems, and celestial knowledge, were also a civilization where women could and did hold power. Not often as front-facing warriors or empire builders, but as spiritual leaders, political stabilizers, and dynastic linchpins. While kings like Pakal the Great dominate Maya inscriptions and monuments, a careful reading of the archaeological and epigraphic record reveals that Maya women shaped the fate of cities, not always through conquest, but through continuity. Royal Maya women were typically born into noble lineages that stretched across city-states. Their marriages were diplomatic weapons, used to forge alliances, resolve conflicts, and consolidate power. A single woman's bloodline could connect rival kingdoms, secure succession, and legitimize a dynasty. Take, for instance, Sakkuk, the mother of Pakal the Great. When her husband died and the throne of Palenque was left without a male heir, Sakkuk stepped forward, not as a placeholder, but as a queen regnant, a sovereign in her own right. For 3 critical years, 615 to 618 CE, she ruled Palenque, oversaw public works, and likely coordinated religious ceremonies. She didn't simply maintain the throne, she defended it, until her son came of age and was ready to rule. Sakkuk's image appears on multiple monuments. In some, she is seen standing beside Pakal, participating in ceremonies. In others, she's alone, enthroned. This visual parody suggests that her authority was not symbolic, but real. And she was not alone. Across the Maya world, in cities like Yaxchilan, Naranjo, and Calakmul, inscriptions and stele reveal powerful women leading ceremonies, commissioning architecture, and even commanding armies. Some bore the title Ajah, or Lord, a word used for sovereign rulers, regardless of gender. At Yaxchilan, for example, Lady Cable Zook, wife of King at Samnijbalam II, is depicted in multiple panels performing bloodletting rituals, summoning ancestor spirits through divine communication. These were not ceremonial flourishes. They were state-sanctioned performances of divine power, essential to maintaining cosmic and political order. Women like Lady Sixkai of Naranjo took it even further. After being sent from the city of Dos Pilas to Naranjo as a young princess, she established a dynastic coup. Her son was too young to rule, so she governed as regent, led military campaigns, and established new monuments. Under her de facto rule, Naranjo became one of the most powerful kingdoms in the region. And yet, despite their accomplishments, Maya women were often excluded from formal succession narratives. The names appear less frequently in king lists. Their images, while prominent, are rarely accompanied by detailed glyphs. Power for women was often spoken in ritual, not carved in stone. This is why the Red Queen's tomb, devoid of name or inscription, yet rich with sacred symbols, is so striking. It reflects the spiritual nature of female power in Maya culture. Where kings were remembered in glyphs for their military campaigns, women were buried in ritual spaces, surrounded by offerings meant to sustain not just memory, but metaphysical influence. They became part of the cosmic cycle, reborn not in story, but in spirit. The Maya concept of power was deeply cosmological. Kings and queens were not just rulers. They were intermediaries between the gods and the people. Through bloodletting, offerings, and ritual dance, they opened portals to the divine. And women, especially royal women, were central to this process. They gave life. They gave blood. They connected dynasties to the gods. In fact, many Maya creation myths emphasize duality, the pairing of male and female forces. The hero twins of the Popol Vuh, the sacred Kitsch, Maya text, are born of a divine mother. The maize god, so central to Maya religion, must be planted, buried, and reborn, a process mirrored in both male and female initiation rites. Thus, to bury the Red Queen in cinnabar, the color of both blood and maize, beside her husband, is to reenact the cosmology of rebirth. Her tomb was not just a resting place. It was a ceremonial chamber designed to launch her soul into the afterlife, to join the ancestors and possibly return as divine essence in the next ruler. Even the bone needles and obsidian blades found in her tomb hint at her ritual role. These items were not weapons of war, but of auto-sacrifice, the sacred act of drawing one's own blood to feed the gods. Only the elite performed these rites. That the Red Queen was buried with such tools suggests she had spiritual authority, perhaps as a high priestess or ceremonial leader. What's striking is that despite their significance, Maya women often disappear from historical narratives. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, they imposed a European patriarchal lens onto indigenous societies, interpreting female rulers as anomalies or mere caretakers. Over centuries, this perspective influenced how scholars viewed Maya history. But archaeology, especially from the late 20th century onward, has begun to correct the record. As tombs like the Red Queen's are uncovered, and as glyphs are retranslated, we are seeing a resurgence of women's presence in Maya political and religious life. Today, Maya women are being re-examined not as background figures, but as actors in their own right. Their absence from inscriptions is now understood not as proof of absence, but as a reflection of different cultural values, where ritual, lineage, and spiritual duty often spoke louder than titles. This reinterpretation gives the Red Queen new life. She may not have ruled by decree, but her tomb, her jade, her cinnabar, they all whisper of a woman whose life was central to Palenque's spiritual and political structure. She was not a consort draped in luxury. She was a keeper of sacred order. She may have nurtured kings, performed ceremonies, legitimized dynasties. And in death, she was placed beside a god-king, not behind him. If Pakal was the sun, descending into the underworld to rise again, then perhaps the Red Queen was the moon, whose phases guide the night, whose cycles reflect birth and blood, and whose silence contains its own kind of power. She ruled in silence, but now she speaks. And through her, we begin to hear the voices of countless other Maya women, buried, forgotten, erased, now rising from stone, scarlet, and time. She left no name, no monument, no recorded words. Yet her story survived in stone and scarlet, buried beneath a temple beside a god-king, wrapped in the sacred red of rebirth. The Red Queen did not ask to be remembered, but she was, not by accident, by design. Her death was a ritual, her tomb a cosmic gateway, her legacy a myth we are still trying to decode. To the ancient Maya, death was not a conclusion. It was a threshold, a passage into a layered and often perilous realm known as Xibalba, the underworld. It was a place filled with tests, gods of decay, and rivers of blood and scorpions. The soul of the deceased did not simply drift into a serene afterlife. It had a journey through trials, and that journey required preparation. The tomb of the Red Queen, hidden within Temple 13 at Palenque, is one of the most spiritually charged examples of how the Maya prepared their dead, especially the elite, for that journey. Her burial, sealed for over 1,300 years, reveals not just a funeral, but a cosmic ritual. Every object, every color, every placement had meaning. This was not the death of a mortal. It was the transformation of a soul. At the center of it all was cinnabar, the brilliant red mercury sulfide dust that coated the Red Queen's remains. In a Maya world, red was more than a color. It was life, the hue of blood, sunrise, fertility, maize, and divine vitality. By covering her in cinnabar, the priests, or perhaps her family, were symbolically offering her lifeblood to the gods, preparing her for rebirth in the next world. Only the most revered dead were buried with cinnabar. Pakal the Great, the ruler of Palenque and presumed husband of the Red Queen, was also coated in the substance. That both received this rare and sacred treatment places her on equal footing in the eyes of ritual and cosmology. The choice to bury her beside him, mere meters away in a twin-like structure, was not a romantic gesture. It was theological and political. In the Maya worldview, rulership was not singular. It was relational, a harmony of cosmic dualities, male and female, sun and moon, sky and earth. If Pakal descended as the solar deity, the Red Queen may have risen as a lunar counterpart, guiding the night, watching the cycles of fertility and death. The architecture of her tomb reinforces this cosmic vision. The chamber was buried deep within Temple 13, accessible only by a steep staircase, sealed with heavy slabs, and devoid of external decoration. This descent mirrored the mythic descent into Xibalba. Every step downward was a spiritual metaphor. The queen, in death, was entering the womb of the earth, a return to origin, a waiting place before rebirth. Unlike the grand iconography of Pakal's sarcophagus lid, the Red Queen's tomb is stark, silent. But silence in Maya ritual is not absence, is sacred space. A tomb like hers was a cosmic seed. The idea that by burying the body in sacred color and sacred place, the soul would be reborn not in this world, but in the cycle of time itself. Her offerings further reflect this idea. Around her were placed jade beads, bone needles, obsidian blades, and ceramic vessels. These were not decorative. They were functional tools for the journey into the underworld. The jade beads symbolized life essence. Jade was considered the breath of the gods, the color of maize, the sacred crop that sustained both body and spirit. The bone needles and obsidian blades were associated with auto-sacrifice, rituals where rulers drew their own blood to feed the gods. In death, these items allowed the queen to continue her offerings in the next realm. The ceramic vessels, some still sealed, may have contained food, chocolate, or incense, nourishment for her spirit during its journey, or gifts to appease the deities she would encounter. And then there was the most haunting object, her jade funerary mask. This mosaic, composed of small jade tiles shaped to resemble her face, was more than a death mask. In Maya belief, the face was the soul. To mask it was to protect it, preserve it, and present it to the gods. This mask made the Red Queen immortal, not in body, but in cosmic identity. She would be recognized in the afterlife not as a decaying corpse, but as a divine version of herself. The surrounding architecture and spiritual symbols point to another layer of her burial, that of deification. In Maya religion, rulers and high-status individuals were sometimes believed to merge with gods upon death. This was not merely metaphor. Through proper rituals, offerings, and burial practices, they could literally become part of the divine order. Ancestors who watched over the living and maintained balance in the cosmos. The Red Queen's tomb suggests she was intended to become such a being. She was not just buried. She was planted like a sacred seed that would blossom in the next cycle of time. This idea of transformation through death was central to Maya life. And in the Queen's burial, we see the echoes of a worldview where power transcended time, where death was just a doorway, and where women could hold the keys to both life and afterlife. Her lack of inscription, her namelessness, becomes, paradoxically, part of her power. In a culture where names carried spiritual weight, her silence may have been intentional, a cosmic mystery rather than a historical footnote. Perhaps her name was too sacred to write. Perhaps her memory was meant to be carried in ritual, not stone. Or perhaps her story was buried on purpose, to be uncovered only by those willing to read bones, dust, and silence. Today, the Red Queen's legacy continues to unfold. She has become a symbol not just of ancient royalty, but of the power of ritual memory, the idea that what we bury, we also preserve. Her tomb forces us to reconsider the way we define importance in history. Is a person remembered because of their name or because of their meaning? In a world that often favors noise, the Red Queen reminds us of the power of silence, of a legacy built not on words, but on sacred geometry, celestial color, and unspoken reverence. She challenges us to see burial not as forgetting, but as transformation. And in that sense, her tomb is not a grave. It is a story still being told.